take it as a no.
I take that as a no.
Update on planned August 1st presentation and recommendation to council on ordinance regulating thermal sources for new construction. So thank you everyone for terrific set of comments. I believe Paul circulated the
It's in here somewhere.
latest deck that reflects all those comments. I guess I open up to folks, what folks would like to do. Should we walk quickly through it? Do folks want to give more comments? Are we done? Jesse, you might not have seen it. I mean, if you'd like me to quickly go through it, or what would folks like to do?
I saw a version, I think a pretty recent version, so no
Okay.
need to go through it for me,
Okay,
but happy to if the committee wants to.
anyone have a perspective?
I looked at it. Looks-
I think we're good. I don't think I have a lot of comments on this one. I think this is good. We've been through this a few times.
We have,
Andrew, do you want to take 20 seconds and just describe what you've changed from the last?
oh boy, I don't know if I can do that, honestly. There've been so many changes.
Or just
a lot of.
anything significant since the last meeting for the public?
Whew, okay, sure. Yeah, well,
There are 2 extra slides.
moved a bunch of stuff to an appendix where the information, which I think is important and relevant, can be used as reference as necessary as we go through the presentation. So kind of shorten the key messaging, worked a little bit. Well, why don't we just pull it up? I just go through quickly the slides and do that. Can you pull it up?
Yep.
So added a little bit about what this is about on the first page. Thank you, Paul. Right there on the bottom. So, yeah. Next.
Just for folks at home, are you seeing this as a full screen or are you seeing a next slide thing?
Seeing the full screen.
Okay, great. Just making sure we got the right settings there.
Thanks to Srini, added a nice picture to this slide. I think that helps it pop a bit, but the data is still the same. The next slide added some more color and also a nice picture. I think when we do the plan, honestly, it's important to not just focus on the fact that, you know, Vermont will have local climate change impacts, because to my mind, those are kind of dwarfed by the things that will impact Vermont based upon the global changes that we're going to see. So, you know, when the world can't feed itself and coastal cities flood, that's going to be pretty dramatic impact on Vermont. In addition to our own local climate getting warmer and hotter. So I thought this page was important from that perspective.
What's the source of the chart?
Good question. I sourced the
It's down here.
The source is right there on the chart, Srini. The
Is that the one on the left?
no, it's it's coded as the source.
IPCC.
It's coded. The chart itself has the color coding that tells you the source of the data.
Right in there.
Oh, I
I
see what
see.
you're saying. Yeah, the little
Yeah.
box.
Yep.
The little box, yeah.
Yep. It's yeah.
Like, is it from a publication or is it from?
Where did I pull that from? You know, honestly, I'm like on all these climate change groups, and someone circulated this. They might have put it together from these 3 sources, but it's a pretty well-known and well circulated graph. I don't know who actually compiled the 3 sources together.
This is the kind of thing, my preference is you pick something that is already published, that is well known.
Well, it is. This is, I mean,
Not the chart, right? The comments are from IPCC. I'm
Yeah.
asking about the chart.
I honestly, I can probably find originally which group put this together from, you know, existing data sets, but you know, it's certainly verified data. I mean, this is, and I think it's important to show how dramatic the change in our climate has been during the Industrial Revolution. It's just kind of pops out at you that this is a really anomalous period.
Andrew, if you are able to find the citation for it, it's also good as just a general practice for copyright that we're
Yeah, okay, let
listing.
me try and
It's
do that.
fine to use excerpts, but we're supposed to
Yeah,
cite,
let me try and do that.
especially if this becomes a document that we share. If you're able to, that would be great.
Yeah, okay. So then the next page is not changed. Just kind of history here. And then the next page pared this down a little bit to just focus on buildings, as we will discuss last time.
I'm realizing that the data on this slide doesn't necessarily match the most current version of the plan.
Oh, okay, you want to quickly tell me what, or you want to talk about after, or?
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
works
so
for you.
let's
I mean, it is 500 units, but it's split between existing housing units and new
Okay.
housing units.
Well, let's just make sure it's
Okay.
accurate, so we can talk about it after.
Okay.
Next page, this page, I don't think I had before, actually, just cobbled together a bunch of other stuff and made it, I think, just a little clearer. Oh, I did just in bullet 2 pull from Melanie what you sent around, so I said additional reductions of 5,048. I replaced XXX with 5,048. I think that's what we had in the plan. Of metric tons of CO2 equivalent. I think that's what I saw in there.
Yeah, I think this is the difference between business as usual versus converting all units,
Yeah.
new construction between now and 2030.
Right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
This is the part I think I would like to highlight, that we point out the issue more specifically, and I think it warrants a discussion. So it's not clear to me, as we go through the material, it's not clear to me what the ordinance is focusing on. Is the ordinance focusing on all new construction starting 2023, going to net zero? That's what Melanie's chart numbers are showing, greenhouse emissions numbers. Is that what the ordinance is focusing on? I don't think, reading more details on Burlington ordinance, I don't think that's the case. So they have language that says transition between now and 2030 to net zero. So I would just like us to have a specific discussion on what our intent is here and what those numbers really mean.
Well, I mean, my intent was to ask the council to mimic Burlington's ordinance, which I agree is not
It's not net zero.
not net zero, but my understanding, talking to at least the SD Ireland folks who are engaged in 2 of the major projects now in Burlington, is that notwithstanding they're entitled to have a backup heating system that's fossil fuel, they and no one intend to do that. They intend to build Camden Rise all electric and intend to build City Place all electric. And so if the grid is net zero, which it is, then net zero. So I think this effectively gets you
For
there.
large buildings, it does. For individual single-family homes are actually harder to get to net zero.
Well, again, if they're all electric.
Than multifamily homes, but they can be all electric. And I think that's the intent of the
But
ordinance,
if they're all
Sorry,
electric,
is to get you to
What's-
net zero.
Where's the emissions if they're all electric?
zero.
Where's the source of emissions if they're all electric? I thought you were gonna say the gap is the water heating, because that's the difference between what.
No, but we're recommending
No,
how, what
it
he
would
pump.
be, I think if the homes are all electric, they aren't necessarily net zero because they may not have solar systems on them.
No, but
That's the only
the
thing.
grid is
But they can be
100%.
added. They can be
The-
net zero ready, or they can,
Sorry, but the
never
GMP
have
grid is
solar.
carbon free.
but it is
100%
carbon free.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. And that's the Burlington ordinance. They're not saying it's net zero. They
But
just,
hold on,
they're just
so-
kind of tackling the
If the homes
tackling
are all
the-
electric and the GMP grid is carbon free, then you're net zero.
I guess we're getting into a distinction between,
Technically, you're not.
there's some definitions of net zero where you're allowed to have offsite renewables and some definitions of net zero where you need to do it
But
all
we
onsite.
haven't
So this
gone
would be
to
an
that
offsite
nuance
renewable.
here,
Right, it would
but
be, you could, yeah,
So-
I mean, it's.
Yeah,
offsite
I mean,
renewable.
the way I characterized it in the plan, in the modeling, I thought about it as fossil fuel free, because
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Ethan said,
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's how I thought about it
sometimes,
too.
you know,
Yeah.
net zero requires a building to also be generating the amount of electricity that it's using. My understanding is that wasn't the intent of the.
Right, because we're
conceptual
leveraging off the
ordinance.
GMP grid and that's how all the modeling is done.
yeah.
So this seems like mostly terminology. The one question I do have though is, where do we fall on water heating? Because Burlington left
So
water heating out.
it's in here, it's in here. So let me get there. So I think, you know, I think we could, in good faith, say that this is effectively a net zero ordinance, even though the words don't exactly say that.
I understand that. I'm just asking the question, the way the Burlington has passed a resolution on May 12th, subsequent to the ordinance. And that says.
That's
that
for existing, Srini, not for new. That's to implement the charter.
It's a, no, let me just read. I just forwarded to the whole group. It's on page 2. It talks about with an initial focus on new construction, major renovations, large commercial buildings, and city buildings, and with the goal of decarbonizing all buildings by 2030.
Yeah.
So they're talking about a transition period. They're not talking about a effective date where everything is going net zero.
No,
Or
no, but
everything
they're-
is decarbonized.
Their ordinance for new construction is effective a year ago. And all new construction in South Burlington has to satisfy their ordinance. And the developers that I've spoken to are intending to build all electric, which is effectively net zero.
It might be net zero in Burlington because they have their own utility.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of South Burlington, I think getting the name
Yeah,
helps with the messaging. And so if you call it net zero, somebody may interpret that as you're also requiring renewable energy generation at the same time. So if you're not, it makes sense to consider calling it a
I think-
fossil fuel-free
Free.
ordinance
yeah.
or a carbon-free ordinance.
It's
for heating.
decarbonization. It's decarbonization of the
Well, honestly, look, I
sources.
haven't called it anything. I said that we should require an ordinance that, you know, requires a renewable primary heating system. That's what it actually says on the recommendation, on what we're asking for, right? If you skip
But
forward.
is the second bullet the only place we are referring to net zero, or are we referring to net zero in the earlier page?
I think that's the only place.
If you go to the earlier page.
So I would change that, the net zero reference to either carbon-free or fossil
Yeah.
fuel-free.
Is that what your plan says?
That is what I have modeled it as. I've modeled 143 homes each year to
Okay,
be
so you're gonna-
fossil fuel.
That's the word you're gonna
free.
use, is not fossil fuel free?
I've labeled it as fossil fuel-free heating ordinance
Okay,
Yeah,
so I'll use the word
for
fossil fuel
new
free.
buildings.
Okay.
Good, that's clear.
There is page 5 has a reference at the bottom to net zero that we should.
and what about the previous page? What about the previous page?
Oh, yeah, last line.
So we should say all new construction,
Commercial and
fossil fuel
residential.
free.
Yeah,
Okay.
fossil fuel
Yes.
free, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And Srini, looking at the resolution, it looks like it says the goal of decarbonizing all buildings by 2030. So I assume the ramp up period that you're thinking of is for the existing buildings, not so much the new construction.
It's not clear to me. It's nowhere it says that anything new that's going to be constructed starting September 2021 was going to be 100% fossil fuel free. It was not clear to me. I'm asking the question. Are you guys assuming that?
We have their ordinance. And the ordinance says it needs to be a renewable primary heating system, which I grant leaves some room for a secondary fossil fuel system. But what I'm telling you is discussions I've had indicate no one's
They're not
planning on
doing it.
going through the extra expense of that. So I think effectively it's a fossil fuel free ordinance, but it's not, the words don't say that, but I think that's what they're.
We can say that in the
I think
ordinance
that's what they're
we're
counting on.
proposing.
I think we should mimic Burlington's wording. ours. I really do.
Okay.
And I think that we can be confident that if this passes, we're doing a hell of a lot of good. And if some home has some backup natural gas system for 15%, like, we're all gonna sleep well at night.
I think the ordinance that has the new construction language, the really firm new construction language is ordinance 5.07 from August of 2021. And that's the specific one that has the language about heating systems.
It's September. It's on the next page with link.
I guess digging into this more, I'm finding more material with more color. That's why I'm asking these questions. I think the September 2021 ordinance is an old set of description. There is a lot more from Burlington around this. They have delegated this to Burlington Electric Department now.
They've done that.
figured
The
out.
delegation is for the charter change, how to implement their authority to regulate fossil fuel systems. That's what they've asked Burlington Electric to opine on.
So Andrew, I would like to understand the whole landscape. That's why I'm asking the questions.
Okay, but we're not
Right?
in August going to be asking the council to implement the charter change. We'll do that in September when we do the full plan. This is narrowly for this ordinance.
So anybody who sees this is gonna ask these questions. These are like obvious questions a common resident would ask. The next line of question, we have, I believe we have roughly 1,000 units permitted in the pipeline for South Burlington.
Yes, well, at some form of approval, yes.
And all those would fall under this.
I think that becomes, and I think you've talked about this briefly, but I think that becomes a discussion and review by the city attorney about how far along the
Okay.
line a project can be.
Okay.
So if something got an approval for a subdivision, but there's not even a concept of a house, that may be very different from they got approval for an exact house design and they just didn't start to build it until tomorrow. There's a continuum somewhere between there, and I don't think I can weigh in on.
So it's a
it.
gray area right now.
I would say it's not a gray area because there's no ordinance, but an ordinance would have to spell out when exactly along the process a house is far enough along
see.
to be
Okay.
considered pre-existing essentially.
So portion of the 1,200, you probably cannot do anything at this point, and a portion of the 1,200, you may be able to influence it. Is that the right way to say it?
I guess I would think about it. Yes.
Well, I guess the question is, does each individual home in a development have to come in for a permit?
Yes.
So that should be the answer. It should be when you file for the permit, that's the date.
It's a
So if
permanent
you-
system. We're getting lost in the weeds. I mean, the
Yeah,
city will figure that out. The city,
Yeah.
I don't think we need to figure out that detail here.
But because I'm concerned too, that too many homes may think, oh, well, we permitted this development. We've got 400 houses that we don't have to do with electric heat because they're already permitted. And I think it does need to be clear.
Well, it can
Because
be made
builders-
clear after they
Yeah.
It has
pass
to be
it.
made.
It can be made clear by planning and zoning and send a letter to everybody.
Exactly, but we don't have the expertise to weigh in on that. I mean,
And-
Yeah.
let's hope
we
the
can do
council
this.
passes that and they'll figure out the effective date.
It's
Yeah,
not-
excuse me, we're lost in the weeds here.
We are.
The objective of this presentation is to make a compelling case to convince the city council to do what we're asking them to do. It's not to get down into the
I
nitty
understand
gritty,
that,
which
Mike,
they won't be able to do because they're just as qualified or unqualified as me to do that.
I'm sorry. I'm
I'm not-
asking legitimate questions here to get a better understanding. You can't just gloss over details and say, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. I'm asking legitimate questions here. So do we understand it? Like when we go to the Sobu nights, when we go to different places to talk about this, can we
We're gonna say our
intelligent?
hope is it gets implemented as quickly as possible.
No, can we intelligently speak about it?
Well, if we're gonna answer the question, it sounds like we need to get some other expertise, because I think we could talk about this for hours. No one
Exactly.
here has the
Exactly.
answer.
But I don't think we need to get that expertise before we present this. We're getting too detailed.
Jesse?
So you are a policy advising arm to the council with a very specific task of delivering a climate action plan. I think as as close as you can get to what your policy recommendation is to the council
Okay.
will make the council's process easier for understanding what you are recommending. So I think some of these details on a policy level are important for you to think about. Are you thinking about all homes that apply for a zoning permit moving forward is a very different thing than all homes that apply for a building permit moving forward and will have a very different impact on the development community. That is a policy question, and if you don't handle it, the council's gonna handle it, and it's going to be a harder political lift for them.
So we need to define what we mean by new construction.
I'm just recommending the
Honestly, I don't even know the
tighter,
difference between a zoning permit and a
policy.
building permit. I mean, we don't have that expertise here in this task force, so. if
We
you
do
wanna
have that
help us-
expertise.
We do?
I think several of us are pretty
Okay, so
aware
what's
of
the
the
between a zoning
difference
permit
between
and a
a
building permit?
a zoning permit is per development, a building permit is per specific structure. You know, and I think what we're talking about here is heating system per specific structure. The difficulty for builders will be that they may have made assumptions on a development basis about how they're going to construct the buildings. They may have made certain promises to contractors that they're gonna do this heating system. So if you change halfway through a development, they're gonna be upset by that.
Let me flip to the recommendation.
So, I
and-
mean, it's a realistic question, you know, you can't just
What this
say,
says is a condition to permitting, so if there's something more
But it is-
specific that we should say, and Paul, if you have a recommendation, or Jesse, if you have a recommendation, we could just throw it in here. I don't personally have enough expertise to define that, you know, more specifically, but.
well,
can I finish my thought first?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that the more specifics you can give the council, the more they're going to have political cover from your group to move something forward.
So do you have a recommendation?
No, I
For
haven't
you?
read this Burlington ordinance.
So what I can say is that there are sort of two major markers in when development takes place. One is when it goes for multifamily. One is when it goes to the development review board and is reviewed at a foresight plan, and they show the broad picture of the building. Oftentimes, they're designing the interiors of the building, but we're not really seeing that. The next stage of it, or in a subdivision, we'll often get the sort of like basic layout of a house, but that's it. The next stage of it will be when there is, from our office, a zoning permit, and for projects that need this, multifamily buildings, the fire department getting their life safety codes. That's typically the point, especially with the life safety codes, where they've got all of the, you know, they're getting their electrical permits, they're getting all that. That's where all the specifics need to be nailed down. And of course, you know, during construction, things happen a little bit. So those are the two real
That sounds like the
markers.
right time.
The pro of doing it at the second one is you'd capture more homes quickly
Yeah.
because all those 1,200 in the pipeline are in that first one.
Yeah.
However, the con of going with that later one is that the pro formas on a development from an economic perspective have been made a long time earlier. So it gets easier politically to do something when somebody hasn't even conceived of a project. Something that you could think about as a way, as a sort of an in-between, is to say that it will be at the zoning permit starting on X date. So it's not if you happen to come in tomorrow morning,
Sure.
Exactly.
that, oh, by the way, here's this new rule, that it is X period of time into the future, so that everybody, as they're designing their building, doesn't have to just get rejected the day they come in.
I think we should recommend the second, the building permit,
Oh,
and then
right.
if the council politically thinks it should be zoning permit, the council can change it.
and just understand that, you know, the architectural and engineering community are not huge in this state. Everybody can be forewarned, you know, so that when buildings are being designed, that they're being designed with this ordinance in mind. You know, everybody knows now in Burlington that you can't put in a non-electric heating system. So by adopting the same ordinance, we've made it simpler for everybody to say Burlington and South
Oh,
Burlington.
so
You
I think that's a
can't
question.
do-
Does anyone know when the Burlington, is it the zoning permitting or is it the building permit?
Theirs is a little bit different because I've just got an entire different structure. It's probably the building permit because they just do it differently. And I don't think we need to get like into the super specifics.
So if I just say here,
Everything there
as a
needs a building
condition to
permit.
permitting, so what would be the right word to mean the building permit?
You could
It's on the next
probably, you know, for describing it, if that's where you want to go, if you want to say permitting that authorized construction.
Permitting that authorizes.
That way, we're not using a specific term because the terms are a little bit confusing between different communities. But if you choose to do that, I would suggest that there be some lead time associated with this. That's what the legislature always does. Sometimes they pick 3 months, sometimes they pick a year. Usually things are not effective instantly for something of this magnitude.
Look, I imagine it's
The
gonna
time-
take some
the
time
timing
to
would
go
be-
through.
X days or months or weeks after.
It's usually a date, a
after the-
specific date.
After the passing of the
Yeah.
ordinance.
So with-
Yeah,
with
like 3
Burlington-
months after.
But this, I mean, if the public is aware, the public community is aware that this is being discussed as of August 1, and the council, I imagine, is gonna take some time and talk to the attorneys, and it's gonna be some time before they actually adopt. We should all be so lucky that it's got adopted this year. You know, hopefully that kind of 6-month window puts people on notice, right?
Yeah, so our intent is to have this be in effect in some form in 2023, so that we reduce the emissions, right? So if we shoot for, let's say, January 1, 2023, this goes into some form of effect. You know, given that there are different types of phases of planning of buildings, and it's gonna apply to some, that's gonna starting January 1. It's not clear to me, but it's gonna start impacting some.
So this is what I've written now.
Yeah.
I can't share my screen.
Yeah,
We recommend that South Burlington adopt the Burlington ordinance as a condition to permitting that authorized construction effective Jan 1, 2023.
yeah, that's good, that's good.
Burlington sort of gave it a couple of months. It was signed and then it was published a month later and it was effective a month after
So
that.
people, when they see this presentation on August 1, will have, you know, about 6 months to
6 months, yeah.
know that this hopefully is coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's not gonna be a shock. They
No,
monitor these things.
honestly, I mean, the
Sure,
fellow I spoke with
sure.
said like they're planning to do all new electric, like for everything. Like it's common, it's the way to go, and it seems like it's.
I should ask that maybe, Don, the AIA has a pledge that architectural firms can pledge not to design any more fossil fuel buildings. And I know some architectural firms have already made that pledge
Yep.
The
internally.
2030 commitment.
Beg your pardon?
It's called the 2030 commitment.
2030 pledge, yeah.
Yeah.
So you know,
2030.
some of this might happen organically. Because if you choose an architectural firm to design your building and that firm has already made the pledge, then they will only take the commission if it's fossil free, fossil
Well,
fuel free.
yeah, I mean, architects are beholden to their clients, so.
But they educate their
Even
clients too.
architects who have taken the 2030 commitment admit that some clients aren't there, you know, but they make every attempt, you know, to get them.
It
to
depends
go.
on the architect.
Put all
An
in.
architect I knew said to his clients, if I'm not going to supervise the building, you have to find another architect.
No,
Some
I'm
of them
just
stand
telling
on
you, some-
principle.
Some clients are a little tougher to push than others.
So
It's just an aside.
to Ethan, your question, so right, the second bullet talks about hot water heaters.
Right.
Yeah, I don't
And
know. I mean, I suppose it's also a question of whether we need to require that they use heat pump or whether we just say electric, but of course, it's probably not great to just say
No,
electric.
No, you
because
can't just
Yeah.
say electric,
I don't
it could be
think-
resistant.
cheap
Yeah, we
construction
don't
and
want to
expensive for
Be
the
recommending
client.
electric resistant
Yeah.
hot water heaters.
Yeah,
I have a question,
The question is just when there's a fallback, right? If someone's putting it in a closet that doesn't have adequate ventilation to support a heat pump, or there's some other requirement, do they fall back immediately to gas, or do they first fall back to resistance electric?
Well, they can't go
Yeah.
back to gas if it's just a closet.
It takes the same space except.
you got height outside,
Right.
yeah.
Because it's hard to vent the heat
Pretty
pumps.
hard.
you got to vent it.
Pretty hard to do anything but electric resistance, but a very small water heater, you know, people may defer to that, but I don't think that's gonna be a
So
big
Paul, I have
issue.
a question,
It's
and
the
I'm just
bigger
curious,
issue is
maybe
the
Jess, you
larger
have a perspective on this.
buildings,
Um,
buildings, Which.
Whether or not it's,
Series.
Can we have one person talking at a time here? I've got hearing problems, so it's a real difficulty for me if two people are talking and I'm trying to listen to both. Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, Michael. Go on, Andrew.
the question is whether or not it's an impediment that the city right now doesn't have expertise in these systems. And if that is an impediment, whether or not, Efficiency Vermont or someone like that could be a consultant to help if developers have questions.
Go ahead, Donna.
You would have to have someone on a consultant basis. Efficiency Vermont, they're kind of unique. And I don't think they would do this. They can say, well, we can advise, but they've never done any, they do not do enforcement.
I'm not talking about
No,
enforcement. I'm
consulting.
talking about consulting.
Well, and it's not consulting either. They're advisors and it's not consulting because they have no legal, they have no,
I'm not talking about legal.
well,
So wait, Andrew, just to clarify.
I guess we're asked.
It's a
Andrew's-
What I'm
little
talking about
Most
is someone
people-
comes in and says, hey, you know what, I want to
technical
build this 20-unit thing. What, do you have thoughts on like, who I should contact for hot water heat pumps for building this size or,
sure,
He-
on a
like-
voluntary basis, Efficiency Vermont can
that's the
offer
kind of
that
thing I'm talking
information.
about.
Yes,
It's
I think if we were to
voluntary.
talk, I think where maybe Donna's drawing the line in her view is if the question were, I want to make sure that I'm complying with South Burlington's ordinance, that's where they would say that would need to be on a contract services
Sure.
or a, but if it's general, how do I make my building more
If they're
efficient? There's a
an
different
electric,
question there.
it is not gonna be a real question.
Yeah, and they have
about that.
they have very good
I mean-
people who can help advise on systems that are available, but they don't design them.
Right.
And, they can't name names. They do, but they're not allowed to. It's kind of weird, the way they work.
And we could also contract with the EIC, which is separate from Efficiency Vermont. Wait, Melanie, did you want to chime
Well, I
in?
was just gonna add, I mean, Efficiency Vermont has the Energy Code Assistance Center. My understanding is that there are programs available to developers who are part of the Building Performance Institute, their certification. So, Efficiency Vermont is a resource to developers who are going above and beyond and, either net zero or installing cold climate heat pumps. But it's more of a educational
Sure.
program, but also there's some incentives, so if this kind of thing passes for the city, then I think having materials and the information and the programs that Efficiency Vermont makes available, I think could be a resource for the city.
So can I make a suggestion for time and Jesse, you can chime in, but it sounds like there's like general support for the idea going in here. There's some like level of detail that may not need to be part of this presentation, but that we need to sort of have ready. And so maybe this is sort of the next phase for us to
Well,
do
I
it.
really want to just flesh out this point, Ethan, because I suspect it's gonna come up, and I'd like to hear what Jesse has to say, honestly, but.
Yeah, no, I was gonna let Jesse talk. I'm just saying, I think some of these details we might be able to table and
Yeah.
tackle out of the meeting.
So I think there's 3 different components of resources with any new ordinance that for good governance you have to take into consideration. So something like this, that is a brand new thing that the municipality is doing that we've never done before. From a governance perspective, what I will be recommending to the council is that we need municipal resources, whether that's money to pay consultants or whether that's staff, to do education and communication about what the new thing is we are doing. To regulate it, an actual process to know what we're going to, how we're going to implement this ordinance. And then compliance tracking, how are we gonna track it, how are we gonna report on it, how we're gonna use the data we learn. Right now, we have none of that in place. When I say that, we have none of those either dollar or human resources in place in the FY23 budget, which takes us through June 30th next year. So I just wanna be really clear and upfront that from a management perspective, that is a concern I'm going to express to the council. They can make whatever policy decision they want. But when we're thinking about adopting these ordinances and having them be successful for the 1 to 25 years they're on the books into the future, I think if we're not thinking about that from day one, we are putting ourselves at legal liability that we're gonna treat people differently over time in implementing an ordinance. And we're not actually achieving the result that the ordinance is trying to achieve.
So can I ask you about the compliance piece of it? So right now, there's no compliance tracking, say, for the residential energy stretch code.
Yep, I would argue that is also a problem.
Okay.
I mean,
because-
so Paul's gonna get tired of hearing me say this. This is the first community I've ever worked in where we have no code enforcement, which means we have all these ordinances on the books that we are really minimally enforcing or tracking or collecting data on. And I think it's okay, and we're trusting people, and we're doing the Vermont relationship. We're all in it together.
would just hate
People
for
know
this-
about it. It's
I would hate for
fine.
this one to be the guinea
but-
pig for, I
Guinea
mean,
pig of what?
well, as you said, there are a bunch already for which there's no compliance tracking.
Right, so let's not continue the bad governance trend.
Ooh.
Well,
I mean,
or
again, the
use-
council can make whatever policy call they want.
I mean, if we leverage this into creating some kind of enforcement mechanism, the other way of looking at it is we get additional benefits from it, because if we create it in such a way that it also allows us to
No,
enforce the
it's
stretch
true, but
codes and a
we'll
whole bunch of other things,
Probably
then
miss out. I mean, like, I think it's likely the case that with this on the books, most people will, follow it. And so we'll get all those benefits that we otherwise wouldn't get.
So-
And if some don't, we wouldn't have gotten those benefits if we're on the books in any event.
So I think the question is the rate of return, right? So say we fast track it with no implementation plan in place, then X% of folks will comply and X% won't. And into the future, how long is that time between saying, we're going to put into place the good governance we need now that will be implemented in 6 months or 9 months or a year, and that percentage is that we lose in that time that we're doing good governance is larger or smaller than over the 10 years that the ordinance is on the books, the 20 years the ordinance is
No,
on the
but
books, the rate of
in other
return.
words, like, you have two periods, right? You have a period where it's in place with no monitoring control.
But that's where
and
we
then-
get really legally questionable. So say it's on the books for a year and we're not enforcing it. And a developer comes in and does whatever they're gonna do, and then the next developer comes in and we start enforcing it, and they say, well, wait a second, that guy just did something right down the road without you enforcing it. And then we're dealing with separate treatment.
As you said, that's the case for lots of stuff today.
Yeah, but again, limiting the liability, not repeating the mistake we've already made.
So Jesse, you made a couple of comments that got my attention. You said, this is the first community you have come across. where
Not
you
come across, worked it,
Worked at,
lots of
in
communities.
Vermont or all of, in the ones you worked before, this is the first community you've come across, there is no enforcement, right? Yeah, so the other way of thinking about, I mean, that's really surprising to me. I don't know whether South Burlington is a unique outlier in Vermont, or this is very common in Vermont.
Very common.
Very common in Vermont. So, okay, so we are among the masses, so that's okay. The second part of it is what you've mentioned that got my attention is, so the way you described it, this unknown period where you let people do whatever they want, and then you have something in effect, and then you force people to practice something, and there's a disparity that may lead to the legal liability issue or whatever. What if the city council is guided with an option where this is what it would take to de-risk that issue? De-risk means you have a process to educate, you have a process to regulate, you have a process to comply. And this is what it would take, and that's when it makes sense to have this in effect. Would that be a productive dialogue with city council?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that would be a great policy recommendation. I
Yeah.
think that because then you are it's kind of doing both, right?
Yeah,
It's saying,
yeah.
this is coming, so everyone who's gonna do it out of the goodness of their heart is gonna do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then we have an implementation plan to stand up it comprehensively as a policy and as an operation into the future and have it be way more successful in 5 years than it would have been otherwise. I think there is a,
My problem with that is, as you said, it's common in Vermont for folks to have ordinances. And look, this is not like, this is not like a criminal thing. Like,
Andrew.
if we get anyone to do this, if we get 50% of people to do this during the period, that's 50% more buildings that we're gonna have to retrofit than we otherwise would have, right? So like, from my perspective, everyone that does this we're ahead of the game, even if some don't. And I'm really concerned that this is gonna be held hostage to a problem that we and others have that's really hard to fix.
Yeah, and sorry.
I just want to be very clear that the governor has laid out in the comprehensive energy plan that it is local government's authority to enforce the energy code. Okay, that's because they don't want to take responsibility at the public service department, you know, or at the public safety department. So that's that's what we're working with, and Anne and Melanie have been sort of participating in our efforts to try to change that,
Yeah,
but
there's
it's
a-
not
there's some
changing.
different
It's
thinking on
not
that.
changing. And the problem is that all the really good builders and all the architects and engineers who were legally liable to enforce, to build to the energy code are completely frustrated by the crappy builders, and we have a few in this town who ignore all of that consistently. And it's just, I think it would just be really upstanding of South Burlington to just say, we are gonna enforce our energy code. No exceptions. We will, all builders will be on equal footing here. Because it's, and because you don't understand what kind of position you put builders in when you don't enforce the
I
code.
think that would be great. I just think that that may take time, and then it holds this proposal hostage
Well,
to
that's-
that timing.
Well, I'd say we should focus on that as the goal.
Well, but you're gonna
I
have
mean,
to have
then,
people competent enough to enforce it, to inspect and enforce.
I mean, then
Well,
honestly,
and
we're
the
just
staff
pretending
of
to do
South
something
Burlington.
here,
Hang on,
right?
we're only talking for single family and duplex houses. The state does all the multifamily, they do all the commercial development. That's
wait,
all
do you
done at the
mean
commercial
fire code
level.
stuff? So that's actually done locally in South Burlington. We have been granted authorization from the state. Our fire department does the inspections for electrical and life safety for multifamily.
And because those buildings are designed by architects and engineers,
But that's not
They-
the energy side.
a high,
That's just,
no, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But because they are designed by architects and engineers who are liable for certifying that the design meets the energy code, that those buildings do tend to meet the energy code. It's the single family and duplex homes that don't. But you have this other area of quads. Quads that technically are multifamily, but I'm not really sure how they're enforced. I don't know about those. But the issue is not, the larger buildings are the ones that are really difficult to understand whether they meet the code or not. Single family and duplex homes are much easier to go, it's a checklist, basically. And if it's not a checklist, they have to have an energy rating that is the equivalent of the checklist. And so it's not that difficult. And it doesn't take a licensed engineer to do this. There are certified home energy raters who know how to do this. It's not rocket science, when you're talking about houses.
So I'd like to address some of the, not that, Donna, sorry, I'm gonna go back and comment.
Okay.
I feel like some of the emotion in the room. I think, and so I'm here tonight because I want to be working in partnership with you all to make sure that any recommendations that come forward to the council are as effective as possible over time, and that we are infusing as much good government into our policy and operation implementation as we possibly can. I think I haven't been here, so I don't know this, but from stories I've heard and histories I've heard, I think that there's a perception in South Burlington that if we don't get things done right now, it will be delayed forever, and it's a stalling tactic, and we're holding things hostage. The administration is holding things hostage. And I want to be really clear that that is not my intent. My intent isn't to say, oh, this is a great recommendation that the climate action plan made in August 1st, 2022, and maybe we'll pick it up in 2024 when we have all the i's dotted and t's crossed. Why I'm voluntarily here tonight is to, in partnership, say to you what my management concerns are going to be as you make policy recommendations to the council. in order that we can come forward together with something that may be politically palatable to the council and operationally possible. So I hear something being held hostage, but I want to be clear that that is not my personal
I didn't
intent.
mean that it was yours. What I'm saying is that I know we haven't had an inspection system for a long time. I suspect putting an inspection system for the entire residential stretch energy code and other things is probably a lot of work. And to have to do that entire bit of work to get this on the books, I suspect it's gonna be a while.
You expect it's gonna be what?
A while.
So can I ask, I mean, I feel like we've gotten some good discussion out of this. We do need to move forward. We're not converging on a single answer. Do we want to put to a vote between the two
Can I just
paths that we
ask,
have?
so what would be your recommendation then to the council? I mean, in terms of solutions.
So my recommendation to the council when new ordinances are coming forward are always to adopt them on the same timeline that we're putting into places where we can, putting into place the pieces where we can implement them.
Right,
So
but I
there
understand,
may
but is that, so that will the recommendation be to put an inspection system in for all the ordinances that are currently not monitored and for compliance?
So that would be a policy decision for the council. We did talk about this at our retreat this week of what would it look like if we started, not what would it not the implementation plan, but if we were going to try and adopt this kind of ordinance, adopt a short-term rental ordinance, monitor the inclusionary zoning ordinance, do a rental registry, how could all of those things be paired together for some economies of scale? So they are already thinking about it, are seeing it as, something we should look at over time. But you're right, to do that is a financial lift from the council, that they're gonna need some
When I say
political
held
cover
hostage,
for.
that's what I'm referring to, getting all that together.
And I'm not saying they have said they
want
want to get all of that together. I'm saying that as we are starting about this matching up between implementation and policy, they've already started to think about it. So it's not that when I say this to them on the first, if we're moving forward in that direction, that will be the first time they've heard it. Again, that partnership piece.
So there's going to be a time between adoption of an ordinance and the city's ability to enforce or at least do the necessary inspections and energy audits that are required. And during that time, new buildings, a developer or builder may choose to comply or may not choose to comply. But you can only make everybody comply once you have is what you're saying, have the capability to enforce the enforcement mechanism.
Right, I mean, then it becomes kind of back to Srini's point, the difference in the level of enforcement and compliance. I mean, we could ask everyone to attest that they have done something, but we're not checking that off. We don't know if that's happened. Or we could actually inspect it and know that something's happened. I think in a good governance model, you adopt ordinances as you're able to enforce them. Or have them be effective as you're able to enforce them. So I think that's why Srini was arguing for do what you all are suggesting, start it with an education campaign and an enforcement date at the time in the future when the council funds the ability to do the enforcement.
But I don't think, what I'm saying is we don't have to wait.
Michael, I don't think a lot
I'm
of.
not finished yet.
Well, I'm trying to explain something that your question doesn't seem to have a basic understanding of what the current requirements are in Vermont for residential energy code certification. All homes, every single home that is built is required to file a certification with the municipality saying that it has met all of, and it's a checkoff thing, that it has met all of the requirements for the Vermont Energy Code. So basically in South Burlington, you could have a couple of other checkoff boxes at the bottom saying that it's all, electric heating systems,
Although
et cetera.
even that apparently isn't being tracked. Tim Barrett
Well,
said he checked his house and it wasn't filed 2 years afterwards.
Well, right now, they are telling me downstairs that they do collect the certificates. I don't know if that's 100%.
Right, we
They
don't
collect the ones
have
that come in,
sort of
but-
to the enforcement piece of it. for single and two-family home, the trigger for confirming it is to have a certificate of occupancy for the building. We don't have certificates of occupancy for single and two-family homes, so we don't have a mechanism to sort of sign off on it's done. So it's hopefully everybody's doing it
But you-
downstairs, but they're not, we've got no way of knowing if they don't.
But there is a mechanism because you have the permits that's been filed. And if you don't have a certificate that's been filed with that within, say, a year or 6 months or something like that, you pretty much can say.
It can be known.
It can be known.
It's just, it's not something we are tracking.
Right. So anyway, so that's required by law in the state of Vermont, that you have these certificates filed. And so, and what we've all, because AIA has spent an awful lot of time discussing this. And you don't have to have 100% inspection. Basically, you have to have spot inspections. And if there's a penalty, it's gonna help get those. It's gonna help getting those certificates filed if there's a penalty for not filing or something like that. So it can be this can pay for itself, in other words, if you have that in place. But the certificates do a lot of the work for you. So the inspection isn't, it's not an all-day inspection or something like that. It's basically a spot check, to make sure some things are, make sure that things that are said that they're being done are actually being done. So it's, for residential, I'm trying to say it's not as onerous as it is for larger buildings and multifamily.
Can I make a brief suggestion to sort of help move on here? So one of the things that Jesse spoke about as a powerful role of the task force is to help give the council some political cover. If part of your recommendation is that you understand that education enforcement tracking is an investment, but it's an investment that you would advocate that they do, regardless of timeline, as Jesse said, there will be budget impact, whether it's 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. Knowing that you are understanding that there is a budgetary impact and some of it may be recouped through fees, but ultimately a lot of these things do have a budget impact, especially in the first couple of years. And that you are, it's not your job to know exactly the numbers, but that from a policy perspective, you believe that that's an investment worthwhile. That's why you're bringing this
That's what the
forward.
fourth bullet says, right?
Yes, well, and I guess I'm saying, and you could even verbally say, and we acknowledge that this involves an investment and it's every investment is a challenging conversation for the council because it's all about taxpayers and tax rates. And that you're going into this eyes wide open and you feel that this is something that's worthwhile. I think that's, and then they can discuss with Jesse what the exact timelines of these things. Do you start the education first? Do you do the enforcement right away? Is it a self-certification? I think those are some things to work through. But for this very first presentation, don't get so stuck in the weeds on that because I think it'll be difficult.
So can I just summarize with 3 concepts I've heard so far? The first concept is, let's not really worry about the ordinance, 3 elements of the ordinance. Let's just ask the city council to do this and let them figure it out. And Jesse is saying that you're not providing enough political cover if you do that. The second is, do we worry about, to Andrew's point, do we worry about all the ordinances that are not enforced today, that don't have compliance today? If you get into that bailiwick, then it takes forever to do all that. So let me just finish. The third is we want to make sure that the new construction doesn't get built with fossil fuels. That's all we're asking for. So maybe define the scope to that limit of activity, and we are defining the problem to a very small
I think
problem.
that's good and that's your role.
Yeah.
It's Jesse's role of council to talk bigger picture about
Sure,
how does this relate to inclusionary zoning.
Sure.
That doesn't have to be your
Exactly.
carrot.
Yeah.
So what I plan to say on this is exactly what you said, Srini. We think it's really important that new construction be fossil fuel free.
Yeah.
We also think it's really important to have an inspection system, but we don't think those 2 things need to be tied together. We recommend the city adopt this ordinance and work quickly and speedily to put an inspection system in for this and for all the other ordinances that the city has. That's gonna be what I say.
But there's a material impact of not doing this properly from a greenhouse emissions point of view. I think that's what we are trying to.
Material
avoid.
impact of not doing it, yeah.
Exactly, there's a
exactly.
material impact. I don't know about the other ordinances, but this one, if you just let it go, there's a material impact.
There's low hanging fruit that we're missing.
When you say just let it go, can you define what you mean by that?
Just pass the ordinance, don't take the time to do the three
Right, I think you're
elements.
saying different things, the two of you, that's why. You're
Oh,
you're both
okay.
saying right, but you're saying different things too.
I see, I see, okay, okay. No, yeah, in my opinion, doing it very loosely without any structure would have a material impact. That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay, so it sounds like there is broad consensus on moving forward with the ordinance and the strong recommendation to advance it. Broad concurrence of everybody that eventually there needs to be an inspection tracking system and a division on folks as to whether that needs to happen immediately. Is that an accurate
Well, it's not gonna
representation of
happen
where we're at right now?
It's gonna happen when it happens.
Yeah.
It's a question of budgeting, and Jesse said fiscal 23 is already shot,
Yeah,
and so it'll have to wait. I mean, it's a bit, yeah, it was disappointing that there wasn't anything in the 23 budget for what we are doing. Even though we knew it was coming.
No, there was $30,000, right? It was $30,000 for climate change in 2023.
It was 50 and cut to 30, I think. I can't
Oh,
remember.
really?
Yeah,
Okay, I remember 30 number, but yeah, so.
it doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
there's-
Probably not enough to do more.
Not
than
enough.
this,
Oh, I mean,
then it'll become a question of prioritizing which of the ordinances the city can staff up for. Yeah, and obviously, I speak for myself, but I would hope the rest of us here would say that this should be the top priority because it involves the existential threat of climate change.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't, if this moves forward with not your recommendation, but an enforcement arm, I think I don't think that there's gonna be removal from fossil fuel inspector and an IZ inspector and a building code inspector and a house. I think that they will be able to be cross-trained and all in the homes for the same, looking at all the things, you know, I think there is.
Building code inspector would probably
Right.
be able to encompass this.
Can I leave this subject with one final thought? Michael, you raised a really good point of just talking of, you know, it's too bad that the council last year wasn't able to, you know, put it in this year's budget. Keeping in mind, of course, that was before this task force even started. So the thought that I'm gonna leave in your heads is, you are presenting the full climate action plan in September this year. The timing of that is because the council starts thinking about budgets in September for starting next July. So as you're thinking about how, and this is very preliminary right now, but as you're thinking about how you're gonna present your full climate action plan, if you have thoughts broadly towards how the council should be thinking about resourcing starting the next year, so that you don't have this exact conversation next July and say, oh, well, we've lost a year. So I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I just sort of hold that thought in your heads.
Well,
Good
there's
point.
a lot in there where there's investment involved. A lot of the actions that are in the draft
Right,
involve investments and grants and incentives, and we're gonna have to quantify all of that. Or try.
right. And knowing you're not yet at the implementation
gonna be less than
plan
$100 million.
phase, but. Was there anything else on this that you wanted to go over, Andrew?
I don't think so. The last thing is, you know, I threw a bunch of the slides into the appendix, as I said, so if anyone has thoughts about whether we should delete some of those slides, move some of those slides up, or otherwise,
You go through those pretty quickly. I think you should leave them in.
Okay.
They all have relevance. They might answer some questions that the council hasn't thought of answering, of
I
asking.
think so.
I know this is the climate action plan task force, but should we turn some lights on so that we're not in the dark for the people?
Sorry, what was that?
The outer two.
This one.
I'd like to just raise one question.
That's my
and
Canadian
If we don't want to talk about it now, Mr. Chairman, that's fine. But related to this, we've all seen the argument that's going back and forth about Evernorth's building in one community versus and it was net zero, and then the one in Colchester was not. That's been going back and forth and back and forth, and the argument that CHT is making is, of course, that it's more expensive to build net zero, and they're in the business of building affordable housing right now. And that's why they did it that way in Colchester.
I thought what they said, it's more expensive to operate. They said that it costs 30% more to operate.
Oh,
For
I thought
energy
they
needs.
said it was more expensive to build
I didn't
it,
think they said to build. I
30
thought they
to
said to
40%
operate,
more to run.
to run, I thought they
to
said.
run it.
More expensive to run net zero?
That's what they said.
But I thought,
That's what the letter said.
but doesn't it cut back on utility bills?
Didn't make any sense to me, particularly the price of natural gas.
So Ann and I had a conversation with VHFA, not Evernorth, and from an operating perspective, I think the costs come from the cold climate heat pumps and the piping being far away from where the unit is, and there's electric line, there's electricity
Heat-
loss, which
Heat
makes.
tracing, there's heat tracing for those.
Yeah, I forgot the technical name for it, but so what it ends up doing is making the cost to heat or cool the unit more expensive for the tenant, and
So
then
is that a
because it,
design issue? Is it that they got stuck with that design? I
don't
mean,
know
I'm
what
trying
this-
to explain this because I will reveal to all of you, as you may know or not, there are people on the Affordable Housing Committee who do not like net zero. We barely got it in the ARPA as just, you can get a couple of extra points if you approach net zero.
But they don't,
So
can we define that
that's
term, Darrell?
further-
Are you using net zero in the way we
Yeah, net
defined
zero
it, or
is-
using net zero in the way that they also need renewable energy production on site?
The former.
The
yeah,
fossil fuel.
so I think Evernorth's position is that having the ability to do net zero and get those financial incentives for net zero make the financials work for doing an electric building. And so without that financial incentive to do renewable energy generation, it makes building electrification more expensive from an operating cost perspective because of the electric line loss and how the heat pump system works from a unit basis.
And that's true even with the price of natural gas today. It just doesn't sound right. This doesn't ring true.
Actually, there's some interesting complicated.
I'm maybe
I don't want to
giving
get
you
into
one.
it here,
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry.
we can talk about this later, because I would like to talk with you about this, because simple heat pump systems, including, just two parts versus more complex systems, there are some efficiency losses where they get more complicated. And I think that's probably what they're talking about in terms of multifamily, where you have more than one heat pump per unit, or, well, we have multiple heat pumps in the building.
All right, well, anyway,
Yeah.
it's left us in a funny position,
Hmm.
is all I'm saying, in trying to talk with Affordable Housing Committee members about climate change recommendations.
So what I'm hearing is that this is something that we should have a really crisp answer to
Yes,
by the time we go in there. And either it is a little more expensive, but we have a plan for that, or we know it's more expensive and from a CO2 perspective, it's worth it, or something like that. We need
exactly.
to have an
Or
answer,
these
not
are the
just-
conditions under which it might be more
So-
expensive if the layout of the property or blah, blah, or
So,
whatever.
well, The Burlington Electric thing that Srini sent around answered all those questions. At least for
Yeah,
Burlington,
that's what I was
with a
gonna
lot
say,
of
yeah.
precision. With a lot of precision, and
Yeah.
basically came out that it was mostly flat. Well, it was cheaper than existing buildings, maybe a bit more expensive than if you compare new, really tight fossil fuel home with new, really tight
Yeah.
electric
Tight
home.
walls,
I mean,
tight
I read that
insulation.
report earlier and, like I said, we had a conversation with VHFA and the anecdotal information that we got from VHFA was that the operating costs are higher, but then what that paper that Srini
Yeah.
circulated contradicts it. So there's a difference of opinion on whether it's more expensive
But
from an
even
operating
that paper
perspective
said,
or
once you
not.
add in the natural gas hookup fees, that it evens out, because you gotta pay like $20 a month just to hook up.
So I
So,
don't have good information on
Look,
that.
I think-
Initial versus operating, it's the operating costs. I mean, heat pumps are more expensive to maintain.
true.
They may be not more expensive to operate, but they are more expensive to maintain. And that may be a lot of it for these, bigger buildings.
See, I think this is where education and talking the same technical language helps. I mean, it's very hard to bring people in these different sectors to talk in a common language. And that report is an awesome report. Anybody who makes decisions about heat pumps should look at that report first. I mean, it's a fantastic report. If the city of Burlington is going to rely on it, I'm sure other communities can look at it and rely on it too, so.
Well, just to zip this up.
Yeah.
I think the point is, we need to have a good crisp answer,
Yeah.
both when we're out tabling
Yeah.
this summer, when we talk to any, in our individual committees, et cetera. We all need to sing from the same choir.
Look, there's
Yeah.
clearly also conflicting information out there. That's why I cite this RMI study from
Yeah.
Minneapolis, right? And that was done when the price of gas was about half what it is now.
Right.
So, and you've got, forgot who it was, who was gonna do this out, the development here on Spear, who, said that it wasn't more expensive to build all electric homes, and that's what they were planning to do. And you've got Cambria and Rise, and you've got lots of examples of it, right? So there's, in my mind, the imperative of doing something and not pretending to do something and taking into account the external cost of the CO2 emissions, just like swamps all these nuances.
So can we maybe work on, and I think it's only partly for the council and it's partly for the public, like, let's identify what some of the questions that are gonna come up are gonna be, and make sure that we have short, crisp answers ready for them, which can have lots and lots of background, but I feel like what we're hearing right now is that not everyone has quite the same answer on it, and it would be really helpful for us to.
Well, if Ethan, you want to add any information to this or feed any information, and I tried to capture what I know in this deck in the appendix on these points. Anything else we can add, let's put it in.
Wanna maybe try to get to showing the,
No,
Well,
Before
so I
time.
just have a question, and it relates to how we presented the fossil fuel free ordinance in the climate action plan and our consideration for equity in this process. And so it's a question to the folks doing the presentation. And this notion that, we're not really sure the impact it's gonna have on affordable housing, and it's an important consideration. So you might want to consider how to handle that in the presentation. I don't have a good answer on how to handle it, but I'm realizing that I don't think that there's a mention of it in the presentation. And
It's
Well,
really
at least
multi.
what was
I'll tell you
discussed
why.
tonight.
The reason is because the information I have is that it's cheaper. Particularly with the fact that natural gas has just gone through the roof. That's everything I've seen.
So,
And I haven't seen any hard information, including the Burlington Electric study.
I mean,
The only thing I've seen to the contrary is this someone in, from the development community saying it's 30% more expensive. So I don't have a source for that.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
so the risk is not whether the economics are favorable or not. The risk is the perception of people who make decisions for these multi-unit buildings, and they need to come around. Natural gas prices, whether it stays now at whatever it is, it may drop to something else 6 months from now. All these numbers will float, but the challenge is not about natural gas pricing and the economics. It's about educating those people to realize that the economics are actually good. And when the natural gas price goes up, it's even better. So I think that at a very, very high level, that's the process that needs to happen with all these agencies to educate them.
and I would actually add a second thing on top of
Yeah.
that, which is
Yeah.
from some, extensive study that I did
Yeah.
for the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. The variability of performance based on how it's designed and how it's installed and how it's commissioned and how it's maintained and operated is like a 2x variation. So part of it is being able to say they can be cheaper, and the other part of it is making sure all that stuff we were talking about earlier about having the resources to educate the
Yeah.
building trades and having some kind of inspection process, whether it is like an official city, energy inspection, or whether it's just some kind of support. There are a lot of stories out there of heat pumps that are not doing what they're supposed to. They're much more complicated equipment. So if we want to have success and not have this blow back, I think these are considerations that we need to figure out, like, what are the resources? How much can efficiency Vermont do? How much can VGS and GMP do? What else do we need to make sure that we solve those problems and get the trades to the point where they're having a really good outcome? It's not trivial. Any other discussion on this? I know, Melanie, you and Ann have a lot of plan to show us, and we have less time than we originally promised you.
So are we going forward on August 1st?
Yes, I believe you voted on that at your last meeting,
And
so
we're definitely, okay, so,
unless, yeah.
Presentations going
I
forward.
mean,
Yeah.
you can choose to change your mind now, but it is scheduled, so.
Yeah.
yeah, no, okay, I just think we need to have an answer for the Evernorth, the CHT versus,
I don't
The
know how we're gonna
Lamoille.
do that, Darrell.
that's gonna come up.
I know, but I don't know how we're gonna get that answer. I mean, we can only, if there's other information that folks want to throw into this, we can. So I'm gonna present what I have, the
Okay.
facts that I have. And yeah, there's always gonna be controversy about economics. People are gonna disagree. That's the nature of politics, right?
This isn't unsolvable. We can have, I mean, not that we'll have an unassailable, answer for it, but we can have something more than, we saw some studies. We should have a direct answer.
Okay. All right, thank you all.
So let's, a couple of us can work on maybe trying to get some bullet points on that. And I'm happy to take the lead there and work with folks.
I can help you.
Data would be good.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Well, and
this
I
is a
think
good point
it's too
to the extent that you can address it, ultimately having other groups like the Affordable Housing Committee being allies as opposed to potentially those arguing actively against it. That's what that becomes very challenging in front of the council. If they've got the climate action group saying yes and the
That's right.
affordable housing saying no, the timeline
And guess
changes.
who sits on both? So I
And-
get it back from them too, so,
No, this is
So
why
it's
you're
good
here
to be
today.
identifying concerns, right? I mean, that's the whole point of you all vetting things before they go into council so that you're prepared for what might happen.
If we're concerned with getting it up quickly,
Pardon me?
having these things ready and answered,
Oh, all right.
right? Okay, any other issues on this before we move on to the draft plan? Okay, great discussion.
Thank you for letting me engage in that discussion with you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to
Thank you for
come
being
here.
Yeah.
If I
Well,
think
you're
I'm
not-
sitting on book, look at you.
All the signs.
Mean you're not staying?
Do you wanna-
Oh, fun.
The plan up?
Paul,
Yes,
do you have it
so
ready?
it's your show now. Plan is up, but not on your screen.
You have two multiple little screens going on your laptop?
I've got two, it's an extended screen, so whichever one it pops up on winds up having to be a different one, so I can do other things on this screen.
Okay, great. Thanks for
Okay,
putting it up there. So the presentation of the plan is the plan itself. This is, very much your plan, and you guys did a great job putting together the content. Ann and I, put it together in a user-friendly format and
Great
did
job.
did the modeling and the data to understand the information, behind the actions.
Melanie? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but those of us who are online cannot see this presentation.
oh, what are you seeing?
I see just a thin white line.
Yeah, mostly black screen.
Oh,
Maybe do you go to view and click full
Okay.
screen?
Yeah,
hang
but
on a moment.
I'm seeing the same thing that Marcy is.
Okay, give me just one moment here. Let
Does
me
Ann want to
try to be less fancy about all this.
She could, sometimes if she's home, she has issues with internet.
Yeah, but I don't think it's me.
Okay,
No, I was.
hang on.
No, it's not
Go
just her.
Lower tech here. Okay,
I was seeing the same thing, if that's worth anything to anyone.
You know, it sounds like the problem's on this end and we're fixing it.
yep, we're just going with a slightly simpler technology so that. Let's see, how about that?
Perfect.
Okay,
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
that's good. Can you make it bigger or is that,
I'm working on it.
okay.
Please continue.
so the plan itself, currently, it's divided up into an introduction. Then after that, there's a discussion about the science-based target scenario, which is the scenario that helps the community to understand what actions need to be taken to reduce emissions from a 2019.
Should we be going through this page by page or? do you
Yeah,
just
I'll
want an
get there.
overview? Okay.
And then,
So why don't you direct me as to what you want me to show rather than me scrolling around? So I'm just gonna leave it until you tell me
Yes.
what you want.
yes, thank you. And then, I'm just going over the table of contents. And then, second to that is the greenhouse gas inventory and then the business as usual scenario.
Okay, that's page
So
2.
upfront, in the introduction, we have a lot of background information. Also discussing information about coming climate impacts, also the community profile. And then we have a section addressing equity in climate change. And then subsequent to that, each sector that we've discussed at length here has a section associated with it. So buildings and thermal, transportation, natural areas, renewable energy, generation, government operations. So that is how the plan is laid out currently. We'll be working with our graphic designer in September, once all the comments are addressed, to change the layout and make it more attractive and user-friendly. So in the interim in this meeting, I think we can go page by page, starting with the introduction, to identify if there's a need for any clarifying questions, or if there's information that you expected to be in here and is not in here. Does that sound like a
Yes,
good?
I have a question
Sure.
on this page. that we're
Yeah, so
looking-
let's just go page by
Okay,
page.
so look at the third concern, more intense rainstorms. And the first line after that,
Okay, what,
I was confused. You're saying of plus 2 inches in one day. And it increases between,
0 to
it's between
3%.
0 to 3%.
Yeah, I didn't understand.
I
that
didn't
either.
understand the 3%.
Okay, so I can explain that. That came from a model that was modeling the increase to be between 0 and 3%. But if that's confusing, and I agree, it is a little confusing, I can take that out. And we can just say more intense rainstorms of 2+ inches in one day. That's basically what it's saying, is that it's more common to get a lot more.
Yeah, I got that. I just thought that was a cumbersome, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to read and to figure out. Let me see, it's answered.
I think.
Yeah, let's take that out.
Drop that part.
Yeah, I think because of where this page, this is like the first thing you really see in the whole report. And
You want it
I
to
mean,
be straightforward.
I showed it to a couple of people and they were totally underwhelmed.
Hmm.
And they're like, why would we do anything if that's all that's gonna happen? I mean, that's really the attitude. This is the page where you can strike fear into people's hearts. And none of these things are striking fear into anybody's
I would
hearts.
agree with that. This does not punch me. They got
This,
all.
it just doesn't, it doesn't provide any convincing argument about why you would do any of this stuff.
Would it make sense to look at? some
I
of
don't
the
like
stuff that's in this
95
deck?
degrees, but apparently some people don't feel threatened by
In
that.
the- in
Yeah,
the deck?
I mean, we could
Go to
take
Florida.
another.
People go to Florida all the time and I'm like,
Yeah, you guys should put whatever you want here. If you want to put what Andrew had in his presentation, that's fine. We can.
no, I'd say keep it simple like this, but I think let's figure out what the real top concerns are. In talking to people, the major concern that people in Burlington and South Burlington seem to have about climate change is that everybody's gonna wanna move here. That's their biggest fear. It's like, we're gonna be a big city and it's gonna be crowded and everybody from everywhere else is gonna move here.
Because they don't
And
think anything can
because-
happen here.
Because they think that our climate is gonna be just fine, because they live in South Carolina now, which I think is uninhabitable currently. But, you know,
So that's interesting feedback. I mean, I think the concept of climate refugees is,
But, right, but that's not change here.
Build the wall.
I mean, I think that's an argument that can be made in there, but this is about how our climate is changing.
well, it is, but
yeah,
also, I
think
mean,
this
the-
top concerns.
Melanie,
I think this
we-
should be
these are just-
about
these are just
how,
numbers.
yeah,
We need to have consequences.
I think it's good, I think that it should be about how our existence is going
Correct.
to change.
Yeah,
And our
people's top
existence.
concerns, people's
That,
top
because
concerns.
people don't really, most people don't have the ability to understand what life is gonna be like here when hundreds of millions of people on the coasts are displaced, when the coral reefs die and half the fish in the ocean, don't have places to breed. There's gonna be such dramatic consequences in the world, and Vermont's not an island. And I think we need to convey some of that, because that's what people don't understand.
right, so putting this in more real world terms about snow melt,
Consequences.
the ski industry is gonna be impacted.
Can I make a suggestion that maybe there's, and without, the simplicity is nice, but maybe sort of have a local and global so that people can connect the things. What's happening physically here that people can be seeing if they're looking? Winter is X days shorter, et cetera. And then,
Trees are dying,
right, invasive. like-
animals, some of their animals are dying because of all the insect
And then if you want to
infestations
also
and-
sort of relate it to, this is part of a global and what Andrew is talking about of saying,
Yeah.
and
Look,
we're
my-
part of the bigger.
My kids
I like
are saying they don't want to have kids, not because Vermont's gonna be a couple degrees warmer, because they know, civilization is a risk of what's gonna happen globally.
Yeah,
Look,
have you guys heard about the Dijon mustard crisis in France?
Is this a
Well,
joke?
the Shiraka
It's not a joke. It's not a joke.
It's not a joke.
Look, as much as we want to, emphasize the real concerns and instill fear, I don't think you can do it all in one page. The reality is people hear all kinds of things from all media. So let's not, let,
Cite the IPCC.
You got one page.
Yeah, so.
no, I'm just
You
saying,
got
You
one page to
know,
make an
I'm
impact.
just
We're
saying,
trying to balance between too
Exactly.
much information, making it
Exactly.
succinct. So what I'm hearing from you
yeah,
on this page, that we need to take this information and just make it more applicable,
Yeah.
real
Daily
world,
life.
yeah.
Yeah.
to the everyday
Yeah.
South Burlington resident. I
Yeah.
think we can do that. So
Okay.
Can I
should
just
we
give you a
move on
couple-
to the next
Yes.
page?
Yeah, and if anybody wants to send me like what they think would be a good page to replace this with, please do.
Great,
Okay.
please do.
I had a question on the next page.
Sure.
And that is that the 66% transportation emissions. That's sort of, in my gut, it seems high. So, and I might have missed something. So does it include all the vehicle miles traveled and emissions from heavy truck traffic through South Burlington on I-89, for example? There's probably 50 or 60 or 100 trucks every day spewing diesel fuel. And does it include all the localized through traffic emissions?
So the vehicle miles traveled is based on what V-Trans calculates for Chittenden County. And then it's apportioned out to South Burlington. And so that means that it's the vehicle miles traveled within the South Burlington boundary.
Yeah, well, what I'm.
So that-
Wherever the car is
The question I had for myself
Right,
is,
so it's
is
not
that
based
with-
on vehicle registration, it's
Right.
based on
Okay.
the vehicle miles, the miles that are driven within South Burlington. So on all the roads in South Burlington.
So
the
including
reason I
those
asked the
traveling through on
question,
the interstate,
So,
for example.
yes, yeah,
if I could clarify, the reason I asked the question is that we can only have a regulatory impact on South Burlington's resident transportation emissions. We can't have an impact on the through traffic and the rest of Chittenden County that drives through South Burlington. So is the 66% a good number?
It's the
It's-
best
well, it's the best
available
we can
number
do.
from a modeling perspective.
Okay, but I mean, I think my question is valid because we can't impact a lot of it through policy and regulation.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that.
But if it's the best we've got,
So
Yeah, I
if
mean-
you're saying that the transportation, the greatest intervention on the transportation is for everybody to have an electric vehicle.
That's one of the high impact actions.
But we're only talking about people who live in South Burlington having them.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a little odd.
we're not necessarily only talking about the people living in South Burlington, because if the businesses in South Burlington have EV charging, then it allows somebody who lives somewhere else to travel
True.
here. So I don't
True.
think it is entirely about that.
True.
And I think, to the modeling question, it's difficult for us to think about in South Burlington, the things that aren't assigned to us, but if we think about it from a regional perspective, it makes it consistent that 19 towns, if they do it all the same, are collectively taking responsibility for their portion parts, so.
Right, if they
Um,
would.
one of our recommendations of having EV charging stations around would help with that, as you just said, and then maybe the through traffic will become more and more electric.
Does the ICLEI protocol for community greenhouse gas inventory address what the boundary is for what the recommended boundary is for transportation? Are we aligned with them? Because it's certainly helpful if we're like doing a bunch of communities around Vermont and around the region. If everyone has a consistent boundary, it may all be somewhat flawed for particular questions, but at least you can sort of sum it up and things don't slip through the cracks. Can you speak to that standard?
It's one number that you enter into the tool, into the protocol. And so that one vehicle miles traveled number is based on South Burlington share of the county's vehicle miles traveled. So it's not necessarily based on a boundary, it's based on an assumption of what
But-
South Burlington's share is.
But when ICLEI asks you to enter the vehicle miles traveled, do they specify whether it's how many miles sort of pass over the roads or how many miles accrue on the odometers of the vehicles registered here?
It's just a straight vehicle miles traveled. It's not based on odometers.
I think the question that Ethan's trying to get to is before it gets apportioned to the 19 different towns, where does that number come from?
It's the VTrans, VTrans publishes annually the Chittenden County vehicle miles traveled. And so we took
It's their estimate of the number of vehicle miles traveled in the county total, regardless of where they're starting or finishing.
correct.
From road studies, yeah.
Okay, I mean, it's a rule of thumb, that's fine.
I had one related comment for Melanie, which is that it may be a small number, but in the brochure, I added a fourth piece of this pie chart. I made it a very slim one, but I called it other. And it's very difficult to quantify, and so I didn't put a number to it. We talked about 1-2%, something like that. But it's things like, where do we account for lawnmowers or solid waste or things like that? And it's not a big piece of the pie, but the conversation that Melanie and I had was, as we're having conversations with homeowners, we don't want to discourage them from switching out to an electric
Exactly.
lawnmower. It is still a piece of the puzzle. It's not maybe at the policy level necessarily, but it's still a thing.
Right.
So wanted to get, I sort of went ahead and did that, but that would be a piece of feedback I'd have, is to just have an other category so that it's acknowledged that there's other subject
I think
areas.
from the earlier study, it was like the order of 5 to 10 metric tons for the other category from the 2014 study. So it's
Study,
2014 Chittenden County greenhouse gas emissions.
the 2010 inventory.
Yeah. I think it's like 5 to 10 metric tons, something like that for the 200,000
Right, but
tons.
when Paul and I talked yesterday, we were trying to come up with a percentage and it was like 1% of.
But it's still not zero. And I
Yeah.
think that's the main thing that I just felt like is important to say, that there's something else, especially because
agree.
a lot of choices that individual homeowners make are gonna be on that piece.
Yep.
Okay, so I will add that
Okay.
to this page. I guess going on to the next page.
Could I just, there was one thing under the leadership matters part where it says Vermont produces the most climate pollution per capita in the Northeast. And it does give a reference down below about where it comes from, but I think it would be really helpful because the question, how or why, just that sort of begs a little bit more explanation of that. Because I tell people that and they're like, you're kidding. It's like, how is that? How can that be?
Yeah, so
And so it would be, I think, helpful to, if you can summarize, it's like, why is that? Do we, is there just that much more transportation?
yeah,
And I think that's what it
that's what
is.
it is.
That's
And the
what it
Energy
is.
Action Network
And also, we
explains
have a
that-
lot more oil heat than
Yeah.
most states do.
Mhm,
We have very little natural gas compared with
right
other
outside of
states.
Chittenden County.
Outside
So,
of
so
Chittenden
we can
County
do some
also.
work to explain that further.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, so the next page, this section explains the science-based targets. And figure 2 is a graph that I put together to show what the emissions need to be from an historic perspective and then into the future based on the modeling. So that 1990 date was based off of looking at the emissions at the state level and factoring it down for what South Burlington's emissions likely were in 1990 and it, I was unable to break it out by the sector, so it's a total number. And it gives you a sense of what the benchmark is against the Global Warming Solution Act requirements and where South Burlington needs to be according to the milestones of the GSWA. So it's the intent of this graph is to put kind of all the data in the context of the Global Warming Solution Act so that you can see where South Burlington was and where South Burlington needs to be to meet this requirement.
So can I, there are some typos and labeling stuff on this chart. Maybe I can send it to you later.
Yeah, so the thing with this version of
Yeah,
the plan is it hasn't been designed, and so
see.
all
Okay.
these graphs are going to change.
Okay. okay,
In, maybe
Okay.
not the next iteration, but in the iteration that we see in
okay, I'll
September.
wait. Yeah.
So, Ann and I did the best that we can using
Okay.
Microsoft Word and Publisher to
Okay.
communicate the information.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just thinking, because most of the greenhouse gas growth has been because of the growth of South Burlington, right? And, pretty much everything has grown here, even though there have been efficiencies gained. I just wonder if that can, how that could be reflected. It's like, because people are gonna say, well, I've done this, I've done that, why are you blaming me? And I think it's useful to show that we have had some efficiency programs that have had some effect. I don't know if it's had any effect on carbon emissions, though.
The numbers are what they are. There's, they were based on an assumption, and so I think what we can do to address that is talk about it in a qualitative, descriptive manner that, although we're seeing emissions increasing over time, people have been doing weatherization and efficiency and fuel switching.
Well,
You could conceivably have a second chart that goes with this that is a per capita.
Right.
Would likely show, like I'm looking at the band between 2005 and 2019. That's much less than our population growth. So per capita, my guess is that, to your point, Donna, we're actually on the right track, which is good. Obviously, it needs to accelerate dramatically, but
kind of reflecting that, we're improving somewhat, but we haven't focused on carbon emissions. That's basically it. It's been a focus just on efficiency. And so that I think what Paul said would be
Yeah,
a very
I can
helpful
take a
thing
stab
to
at that.
do.
So okay, the city resolved for even considering our growth, right, to have carbon emissions be 26 to 28% below what they were in 2005 by 2025. Right, and what this chart shows, at least as of the last, date that we have information, is we're not on track for that at
Nope,
all, right?
nope,
Because
right.
we're
Nope.
actually above where we were in 2005. And I'm wondering whether or not, it's great to be aspirational, this is what we need to do, is what we should do, but to point out how hard this is, to note that we're not kind of satisfying the 17 resolution. I think we should do that, because I think it could kind of further perhaps impetus to actually do something meaningful.
You could just add a marker on the 2025 line that shows South Burlington target. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Add a dot or an X. that-
Exactly, yeah,
The resolution target was what,
Yeah.
about 150 or so
yeah, something like
in
that.
2025.
Yeah.
And,
Well, the marker here for 2025 is where South Burlington would need to be to meet the Global Warming Solution Act.
But Andrew is saying there was a different target set.
no, actually, no, fair enough. That's fair. That is it. I guess it's just,
So are you saying that the level of effort between 2019 and 2025 is enormous and that we need some language around that?
we should just point out that.
We haven't started yet.
That, people can look at this graph and say, oh, okay, yeah, whatever, but that, we're so far in the past, 17 years since 2005, we're nowhere on track to meet that resolution. We've actually gone up, right? And that's, I think, just an important thing to maybe point out in words too.
So can I sort of piggyback off that and say, I think one thing that could be clear on pretty much all the time series graphs in here is to make it really obvious, like, where are we today at 22?
Yeah.
And where, like, which of the lines represent like a factual historical, this is what we know happened, and where are the points where we're like, these are our aspirational goals and we haven't gotten there yet, right? Because this just sort of looks like, oh, things are happening. And I think Andrew's story would come through more clearly if we saw like, oh, we're on this trajectory and we're supposed to be headed down there.
Yeah.
We're not even facing the
Actually,
right
maybe the
way.
way to do then is to put another, maybe a dash line for BAU. Some other line there.
Mhm,
Maybe that's the way. to do it.
okay,
I think we should be, there's also the issue of time compression. We have to do in
A few
23,
years.
24, in 3 years, what we're showing here.
What we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do in 20.
Yeah.
In 3 years, what we're
So,
supposed to do in 20. Yeah,
I mean, the difficulty in doing that needs to be obvious.
that's really the point. And that's why I think this ordinance is so important.
okay. Point taken. Going on to the next page. So this page includes an explanation of the 3 scenarios that were done, the baseline inventory, we've discussed the business as usual scenario that represents no climate action, but does take into consideration population change, employment change. And then the science-based target scenario, which we've also talked about. Any questions or concerns about what's on this page? Okay, next page, please.
Will you put another there in this one too? Right, it's just like a pie chart, right?
Yeah, so I'm definitely, from a modeling perspective, the other category is challenging. I've talked with some folks this week about modeling emissions from lawnmowers and leaf blowers, which was Paul's concern. The data just, it's not out there. Solid waste is one of those scope 3 emission categories where, we generate the waste here, but the emissions are elsewhere, in Coventry.
Right.
So, you know, I can
This
add
just-
some
it should just be
contextual
consistent, yeah,
information about it.
And the word emissions one.
Can we use a per capita allocated number from the Vermont inventory statewide?
Sorry, say that again?
Can we use the statewide inventory and just do a per capita allocation for those categories? I mean, they're gonna be near zero, so being off by, you know, a small fraction is not the most important thing. It's just like, it's
Right.
1% or 2%.
Yeah, I mean, so putting in the solid waste, the emissions from solid waste, you know, I can
I
add
wasn't
that.
necessarily saying solid waste. So solid waste is scope 3 and that's not what we're counting, then I wasn't advocating for that. But if we think that like lawnmowers and leaf blowers are in scope, we just don't have good numbers for them. We could pull it from something more generic. That's all I'm
Yeah, I
suggesting.
can check the state inventory if they have that information.
I don't
There
know.
are other states that might have it that we could interpret.
I don't know, I
California.
mean, I talked to the folks at ICLEI about this and they sent me, there was a data point for Chittenden County, but it included leaf blowers, in addition to ATV vehicles, and it was a very large number,
Yeah,
and
it was,
apportioning it down to South Burlington, I think would be, I don't know, I think it would be too high.
I think this can, that 1% can
It's
just
not
fade
important to
away
get it
and
right. I
leave
think it's
this.
important to have just a marker.
Yeah,
honestly.
Okay, so this is the business as usual scenario. If no climate action measures are implemented, I think it's pretty self-explanatory,
except for the last sentence.
which is, okay,
The city's emissions will increase from 196,700 to 196,200. That's not
alright.
an increase.
yeah, so that's a typo.
Okay.
Okay, I will fix that.
Can I suggest generally, the significant figures here could probably
Can you speak up?
chop the significant figures, and we're
Yeah,
6 digits of significant figures for 30 years out in the future is
I think it
Okay.
should say something like the city emissions will generally stay the same.
yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
would cut things to it.
Yeah,
to
even
a
the
couple
chart,
digits.
even the chart is really
It's
not
increased
showing
slightly, it's not,
anything.
it's not accurate.
Yeah.
There's
No,
no,
the
I'm
chart's probably not necessary. Maybe,
sure the inputs are not to 6.
maybe you can combine that with the next, next page
Yeah, I
and just
waffled
save
on
a
that.
page.
I wondered about that as well, of like whether it's showing anything.
Yeah,
I mean, it
Ann
is
and I
kind of-
went back and forth about this.
This is a good one. This is a good one. Not, we're
Yeah,
talking
the
about the
next
previous
one's
one.
very
Next one.
good.
We're
Yeah.
talking about the previous one. The previous one is the business as usual scenario. That's the one that doesn't say much, but the
Yeah.
next one says a lot.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is our by
Yeah,
it.
this is a
Yeah.
good one. Yeah.
You do need to have some text around why the BAU scenario is flat. It's important because honestly, it wasn't intuitive to me why that's the case. And I think as you explained, it's because you have all these federal and state policies which are gonna drive that.
Yeah, well, the.
Yeah, I
text-
mean,
the text
it's
is
Green Mountain
necessary.
Power's, achievement of the 100% carbon free. I mean, so the emissions that we are seeing in business as usual is related to natural gas and transportation. And that's only growing, at the rate of population and
But you mentioned the cafe standards are taken
Right,
into
they're
account,
very
right? And the
sensitive.
EV adoption is taken into account already. And I think it's important to just touch on those
Yeah.
factors
Yep.
because otherwise it's not intuitive.
okay.
Yeah,
We're not able, Melanie, to pull this back further in time, right? Back to that 1990 and 2005 because we don't have it by sector.
Unfortunately not,
Okay.
yeah.
So
I
why,
think graphically, there may be a way to make these two punch a little more, especially what this one is saying, other than I'm hungry and looking for a tiramisu.
Yeah, I mean, and I also will say, and I apologize, if this comes off as a cop-out, but the data extraction from ClearPath is not great. And so this is an auto-generated graph from ClearPath, and pulling out the information by sector is very challenging. So I'm limited in how I can change the graphs that show the scenarios for business as usual and the science-based target. So I don't want to overpromise on those.
just on the science-based target one, just out of curiosity, why is the commercial energy reductions like percentages, like 7% more than the residential and transportation. You know, I'm sure it's not,
68% versus 61%.
yeah, I'm sure it's not just pulled out of the hat, but you know, it does sort of beg the question. It's like, oh, why?
Yeah, the other
why
two
is
are, the other two are 61. the middle
Yeah,
one is
so why
61.
is the commercial more? Is it easier
Yeah,
to
I
get
didn't pick
or?
that. Yeah.
It seems to me, it's like, it's just as hard to do commercial energy reduction as it is to do residential.
My guess is that this was somewhat iterative with the model, and remember that you have to put the output in first to get the input sort of result, and so you were
Yeah.
probably playing with numbers and came up with, what if it was 500 homes? And 500 homes represented 61%, and it could have been 528 homes to be
Yeah,
68%,
I
but
see.
one way or the other, you want a round number somewhere.
Right.
Is that an accurate statement, Melanie?
Yeah, I mean, it is an iterative process and it is challenging to like, you know, answer those questions off the cuff sometimes, you know, I have to go back and look at the data, but you know, so in the commercial sector, we are saying that what is it, 8% of existing commercial area needs to be electrified, so you know, I think it is a more challenging sector.
Right, but it's
to-
also a matter of like, you ultimately, in sort of the science-based target numbers, you have some round numbers about numbers of buildings to be changed every year.
Yeah, I mean,
You
and
could
it's a-
manipulate that to get the numbers to be the same here, but where do you want the round number? And to me, the
Like-
round number is
yeah.
strongest to say 500 homes a year, not 521 homes a year.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, and it's also, you know, I guess making the numbers work and the measures work so that we're under that 60% reduction threshold.
Sure.
Right.
But that's all, but this is all thermal and transportation.
transportation,
It's
yes.
transportation and thermal both.
Yes.
Right.
So, yeah, that,
Honestly, it strikes me this whole thing as false precision though, like I wonder if it's just, when it says we'll need to decrease to 15, 17, it's like, we're really saying, you know, all our emissions need to decrease by 60%. We've picked some targets
Right.
which achieve it, you know, through this means, but it feels like false precision to say we'll need to decrease from 31,678
Okay,
to
yeah,
50.
that's
Like, it's
fair
just,
point.
you know, it's.
You know, we can certainly
think it
talk
should
in
be
just
more-
terms of percentages.
I think so, and we can say that, you know, and if we hit these targets on the next page, you know, we'll roughly get there. But it's just, it feels,
And it would be
Too,
a lot
precise.
easier for the public to absorb it.
yeah.
I think we need to think about
it's
making
clearly
it
too
easier.
precise.
I think there may be a balance though, right? So six digits feels like a lot of precision for 20 years of planning. On the other hand, calling something 50% kind of sounds like we just sat around and we're like, I think we should cut it in half, right? And doesn't really reflect the fact that Melanie spent a whole bunch of time actually modeling out some details. So I think having some numbers that aren't just like 50%, that feel like there was actually real thought that went in here
Okay.
and some details.
So I guess I'm
That's a
reacting
fair
to
point,
will
but
need
not
to
too many
decrease from is.
What if you were to say our targets will result in?
I like that.
And then I think to what Ethan's getting to is rather than saying something like 31,678, say 32,000.
Yes.
Just use round numbers because I think that's your false precision.
Yeah.
We're not measuring it at that level, it's just that's an output from the science, which is,
Okay.
makes sense as to why the model does it, but for the purposes of the
That
planning
makes sense.
document,
And
it's
you can always put that in a footnote or in an appendix or something
Rounded
if you want to show our scientific.
and perhaps in commercial energy emissions, for the amount of money expended, you get more savings. Maybe it's as simple as that, because I mean, the buildings tend to be a little larger.
lot
They
larger.
probably have more windows, you know, I don't know.
But that's
You know,
not-
the trucks are bigger, they travel more, you know, more business miles. I mean, just some reason, why is that number, you know, convincingly
He wants
is achievable?
just to make it easier to
Yeah.
round this, say
Yeah.
32,000.
Ethan's
But
language
it
was,
wasn't that we.
our
will need-
targets will result in
Targets.
32,000.
Yeah.
a decrease from
Tons,
to
yeah.
blank.
or
Yeah.
61%.
And then somewhere in here, there could be, and probably after the next page, to say, you know, any of these things can be, if they're overachieved in one area or underachieved, then they made up in another area. This is just a
Right.
set of.
It's a
targets.
scenario,
Yep.
a scenario.
It's the most reasonable scenario if we were gonna pick one, but it's not certainly.
There are variations, yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so this next page explains what the difference is between the high impact and supporting actions. High impact actions are the ones that we have modeled in ClearPath. They're in the building, thermal, transportation sector. They're the ones that give us our reduction in emissions. The supporting actions are those nature-based solutions and are really important for climate adaptation and resilience, but aren't necessarily going to give us a big reduction in
Right.
emissions.
But we do, you say that data is available to understand the role of forests and trees play in carbon removal on an annual basis. I think that data should be shown somewhere, either.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
so it is talked about in the
Further back.
natural areas
Yeah.
section. So I can
Just reference it
certainly
there.
move that up.
It's in this way further back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then we could either move it or reference it.
Adjust these definitions, so, because you say high impact actions are policy or investment oriented and produce a measurable reduction. We're really saying high impact are the ones that we modeled. You say supporting actions are education promotional and not quantifiable. It doesn't mean that they don't produce a measurable reduction, just we haven't modeled them. Right? I mean, I think the words are not quite what we mean. Supporting actions may well produce a ton of measurable reductions. We just haven't modeled it.
Well, I mean, we do have data that was modeled for the role forests play on
Right, and it
carbon
was- it was
storage and
measurable and large.
removal,
Right.
yeah.
Because it wasn't merely educational promotional. and not
But
quantifiable.
I think it's fair to say the educational and promotional ones aren't measurable. Doesn't mean that things don't happen. It means that actually trying to attribute a particular amount of savings, either in the planning process or like as we go through it.
You know, I'm just
isn't really
saying,
gonna be
we've
feasible.
described the natural area actions as supporting. And then we say supporting is education promotional, not quantifiable. I just don't.
But we also say they're
Quite
critically
mixed up.
important.
Yeah,
You could say that are in not all cases quantifiable, something like that, and then maybe sort of highlight on the high impact actions that these, I think you put it somewhere, that the high impact actions represents 60% of everything that can be done. That's the whole point is, we're
Yes.
picking a few because they're the biggest ones.
They're the big
There's a whole bunch
ones.
of other ones, some of which are measurable, some of which are not, which are all important, but they're not the big 10.
Exactly.
So can I ask a question about the high impact headers there in the graphic?
Sure.
So you've got fossil free heating in the first bullet and then building electrification in the second bullet. And those sound, I mean, I guess there are other things besides heat that can be electrified in buildings, but it seems like there's a lot of overlap there, whereas fossil free heating and renewable energy it's not as clear to me why those are part of one category, because one is generation and the other is.
Maybe the first one is just renewables.
Yeah.
And the
I
second is
see
building
that.
electrification.
it should say fossil free heating and building electrification is one, and then the second one should be renewable energy.
Yeah, that's good.
And then along those lines, I probably wouldn't put VMT just in parentheses next to EV because it is an entirely different suite of things to do to get people to
Okay.
not be driving. I almost would put it with the compact development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
Oh,
that makes
that's
sense.
a
That
good
makes,
idea.
that makes
Reduce
a lot more
vehicle
sense.
miles traveled and have compact development, like those two
Exactly.
things together, maybe as a bullet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm gonna make this comment because it appears throughout the rest of the report, but putting just an equitable transition kind of as a paragraph at the end of each of those sections just struck me as insensitive.
Or being politically correct, but it didn't
Or
seem to.
it just came off really badly, I think, because I mean, just an equitable transition, it's not just about resilience, as somebody I think mentioned at one of the last meetings. I mean, every one of these issues has issues of equity in it. And I don't think we should always put it in the last paragraph.
I hear you. I'm wondering, and I know this isn't a great solution, but if we take the equity in addressing climate change section and move that up in the document, so that, you know, it's more prominent, it's the first thing a reader reads, might help. And then also in the sector specific pages, we do talk about equity, and we are envisioning that some of the equity accommodations would happen in the implementation phase of each sector. So it's just, you know, looking
I
at,
would say that, put that up front, as you said, move it up front,
I
and then
think-
say a lot of that's gonna happen in the.
And
And
then
I
maybe in
think
this
even-
graphic, not have it in parentheses of the
Yeah.
last one.
yeah.
And I
okay.
think even maybe give some examples in, you know, not necessarily in every one of them, but for instance, for fossil fuel heating, you know, and it's just like, you know, it's.
And
you know,
weatherization, there are lots that
Yeah,
are,
it
where they're
just
really
like-
obvious.
Yeah, in places where it's really obvious that these are programs that are gonna initially and most cost effectively be addressed, you know, to those, you know, it's an equity issue because it's gonna be low income people who these programs need to address immediately.
I would have the same concern, because I wonder sometimes when so many of the equity things are, think about it, it feels like we're kind of kicking it down the road. It's someone else's problem. It's like,
Absolutely, which is what the state plan did.
right. And I mean, I know it's hard and I know why we didn't get to it, but
Everybody kicks it down the road.
yeah,
Right.
you know, I don't know how we get some more content in there, but I feel like we need to. It's gonna be really easy for the next people down the line to be like, and we're gonna think about it.
Well, and I
Thinks
guess
about
I just add that, you know, using the state as a, in this way, in a positive example, they did identify whole different groups about what it means to be underrepresented. And I fall into this trap myself of it's not only those of lower income, it's a whole bunch of different groups that are generally underrepresented in governance.
Yes,
And, you know, could be younger people, could be older people, could be people with diverse backgrounds, and language
people for
barriers.
whom
Who
English
knows
is
what
their
it might
third
be?
language.
And so how
Yes.
we implement these isn't, income is absolutely a
Envy
big
them.
one, but it's not the only one.
Even renters, you know,
Right,
it's just like
Even renters.
renters seem to
renters
be
are
very much
underrepresented in our
underrepresented.
governance, for sure,
Right.
and they are over 40%, no,
Yeah,
they're over a
the
third of our.
The statistics were very interesting, that it was such a high percentage of South Burlington was apartment dwellers in rental properties. I thought, wow, that's more than I.
So you have a
expected.
section on vulnerable communities. I think that could be a more comprehensive list, I think. Right now, there's like 2 or 3 different kinds.
Mhm.
There is race.
No, you say that
there's
somewhere.
Age.
Page 8.
Yeah, so, so there's information on what the vulnerable communities are.
Yeah.
People over 65, households below the poverty level, people who don't have cars.
People on fixed income.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're sort of, you know, beholden to what data is available.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying
Yeah,
that
but we can talk about it.
I just, you know, without,
Fixed income probably has high overlap with disability and elderly.
Melanie, remind me to connect this to some work that we have an intern doing right now who's helping to build out a stronger community profile for us, where we may have some more information to lead into this.
Okay.
I think they.
Hey, everyone, it's Ian. I apologize. I am sick and I am not going to be able to continue tonight.
Feel better, Ann.
Thanks for
Thank
taking
you.
Thank you. Yep.
Take
Have a
care.
good night.
right,
Thanks.
One of the.
Yeah, I guess,
In equity, can't we could also use prioritization to that if there are subsidies or or weatherization programs that are paid for, they would be as they would
Right.
go to this below 60% of state median income households first.
yeah. So Vermont
We
apparently,
say that somewhere.
so
the weatherization, there says something about,
In general, when it
income.
comes to equity.
but it
um,
says it as an equity issue.
You know, the federal aid just contributed, finalized $35 million apparently for electrification programs in Vermont. Of the 35 million, 20 million is to direct purchase of weatherization and electrical heat pumps. So 20,000, an average spend of $5,000. Average spend of $5,000 per home. You know, 20 million is 4,000 homes for all of Vermont. It's not a lot.
Yeah, we need to do like 80,000 homes.
Exactly.
So there's 5%.
It's not a lot, so.
First year taken care of.
Exactly. So I'm just saying, you know, if you think about equity issue from that lens, I mean, there's a lot of work to do, so.
Yeah, I mean, so the Vermont weatherization funding does allocate money for
Yeah.
low income every year,
Yeah.
and we know that there is funds in there, but I mean, I'm not sure how much South Burlington is actually gonna end up running some of these incentive
Yeah.
programs, because it's complicated enough landscape out there, so.
Hmm.
I mean, I think this sort of shows how much further we have to go figuring out like what is our role to be supportive of it.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, just kind of going to the populations that you know are vulnerable and introducing them and getting them in the pipeline.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the critical thing, because the programs exist, but people just don't know about them. They don't know what the criteria for them is.
So right now,
They
what
don't know.
CDOEO says is they've got a totally full pipeline, so.
Well, they do, but you know, the pipeline's gonna keep, you know, it'll
Yeah.
keep moving along. I mean, you know, the labor shortages have to be dealt with simultaneously.
That's a good.
Process wise, can I just ask, I don't know if there's any other major items we have on the, gotta go back and check the agenda, but just like. I would love to keep getting through this, but I wanna check in with folks. It's after 9 o'clock.
Yes,
I'm happy to keep going, but I don't wanna presume that everyone can.
no, let's
Stay.
keep going. Yeah,
I don't-
you've done all
I don't-
this work,
Okay,
totally understand.
thank you. I'm sure you've had a long day.
Molto grazie.
But can we agree to maybe stop at 9:30?
Yeah, I would say let's,
All right, let's go though.
so yeah, recommendation would be if you have comments that can be just like sent along, because there's just
Right.
typo or a simple
All of
something.
my comments could have been sent along.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
if
if you
there's
guys
comments you
want
think would be helpful to discuss, like, I don't know.
I sent a whole bunch to Ann and Melanie earlier in the week, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and we can also just, I mean, talk process. So, I mean, we have a
Let's keep going through these.
compilation of comments that we've heard via email.
Yeah.
The comments that I'm hearing this evening will be added to that. And then I need to talk with Ann about the timeline for the next version.
Okay,
So I
and
guess
also
from
get
a
your
process
input
perspective,
as
let me ask
well.
one basic question.
Sure.
Is there anything in this plan that anybody feels is so dramatically wrong that we need to change it right now before it's widely out there for public comment? If not, and everything that I've heard so far has been great comments, but they're not like, oh my gosh, we can't have that be a public document.
yeah,
And I didn't see anything.
there are no
that goes to that level.
showstoppers. There are no
Then I think
showstoppers.
everything here is being collected through the 10th of August, and I think now is a good time for, getting the basic things that
Yeah.
you're all providing, but
Yeah,
There's
Can
one
I
thing
just
in
ask
there
one
about
more?
equity committee, and I was just wondering, is that kind of, does the low income housing committee kind of mean?
that's a big
Is that-
policy question.
That's a big
And it's a
question.
challenging one. Jessie and I actually talked about a little bit today that in her sort of exploring the subject, equity committees are an interesting idea, but they're very hard to deliver in practice. Both because it's hard to do equity and also because it tends to, in some places, lead to that being the responsibility of that committee as opposed to equity being a thing that
Everybody.
everybody's supposed to
Yeah,
do
I
every
agree
day.
with that.
And so I think that maybe a suggestion from us will be that recommendation evolves into something a little bit different than a committee, because a committee might
Yeah, because I
sort of
wasn't like real
shoebox
comfortable.
that subject.
I wasn't like sure about how that would all work.
But I think for the purposes of this round of public input, the idea that the subject is being elevated, I think is good for public
Mhm.
feedback.
Mhm.
And if people have great ideas on how to do it better, then all the more reason.
Yeah, the
I
equity
guess
issue is the
question,
one
were all
that,
the actions in the spreadsheet, are they all in here or is it a select set?
No, all the actions that are in here in each sector are
The high impact
the
ones?
high impact.
Are we gonna have somewhere where we just include the whole list?
Yeah, so that'll be in
That'll
the
be
appendix
the
in the
appendix.
next version.
Okay,
Yes.
So
are
in the
we still-
meantime, we'll make sure that the charts that have that are on our website so that folks can see them. even
Yeah, and
while
do
they're
you
not-
have, did Ann send you the latest?
It depends, why don't you resend it, because
Yeah.
I know you guys have been editing it, and I'd like to say this is the draft.
Okay,
last time we were here, Melanie, we did talk about adding a few maybe additional actions to that list. One that popped out at me from the piece that Paul sent around was to require new homes to be oriented to maximize solar potential. I'd love to add that. I don't know if other.
I think what we agreed at the last meeting was, let's set a deadline,
Right.
let's compile all the actions and add them at that date. So I don't know what date we set.
I think it was as of, well, it was when you voted on, it, I think.
It was August 10th or?
No, when you voted like 2 months
Yeah.
ago on them, and then everything collected up until August 10th, or that you choose
Sure.
at your
Sure.
meeting, then you can then add it to the next round.
Yeah.
Okay.
so on the renewable section, though, there was one question that I had that was a little more.
Page?
there's no page number, it's just the renewable
Sorry,
energy.
it's the one with the big solar
sector.
panel in the background.
Yeah.
On the left-hand side.
After the rest of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's into the content sections. So just the conclusion that it comes to here, it says that the goal, well, I have some general questions about like units in here are a little like,
Yeah.
their energy but no time and some things like that, and energy is a kind of a weird unit for renewables because most people talk about the max power rather than the energy. So I think there can be some finessing there, but within what I was able to compare, the concern that I had is that it says the goal is that we need to ramp up to, 63 to 121,000 megawatt hours, and we have the potential for 137,000. So we have enough, which doesn't feel to me like necessarily what I would say if we can do between 50 and 100% of the roofs, we can make it. That sounds like, and then the recommendation is we should incentivize. And it sounds to me like if we need to do 50 to 100%, we need to mandate that not only new construction all has solar to its maximum capacity, we also need to mandate that existing get transitioned over the next 10 years. I'm not sure that's what we want to recommend, but if we're following that data thread
Well,
through,
by
and say-
2050.
what's that?
It's by 2050.
Even 2050 is
by
a
2050.
range, it's a range, it's not a single number.
Right,
Right,
but
so
if
to get you by
we
2050.
Yeah.
can tap into that 137 by 2050.
But tap into or fully utilize, right?
No, but I think you said 10 years, but I think this is 2050, right?
Sorry, right, so okay, so we have 25 years to
Yeah.
get there, but nonetheless, it feels to me like, I read the numbers and I was like, wow, we've got to do a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of solar and completely change the rules around how we're doing solar, right, every available.
But the important thing here is that right, because we had this conversation, do we need to also say that we need to have solar and open space? And I guess at least preliminary, we think we can get there without that.
So to
You mean
Ethan's
ground-based?
first question about mandating solar, doesn't the first bullet achieve that?
Adopt a policy to require qualifying new buildings, yeah.
Well, but let me ask, is the
Or
137,000?
no, I guess it's not, because it's only new buildings.
Yeah, because the 137,000 is all the buildings.
Can I back up a half step? So the purpose of that second paragraph was in response to the task force asking, is there enough rooftop space? That's not,
And parking lots.
well, but this is, right,
We say we can even get there with just roofs, we don't need parking.
right. Well, if you could get almost every roof.
Right.
Yeah,
To
how
me,
on
the
earth would
story
we-
here is there is a lot of opportunity to meet a good portion of our goal through rooftops.
Yeah.
Combined with strategic placement in non-rooftops, it makes it achievable. Whether it's the airport has put in, 2 megawatts, or next to the Cairns Arena, the city did a little one. Or the U-Mall decides to
If
take
you
their
cover
parking lot,
all
which
the
isn't
U-Haul
going away.
parking lot, you
So
probably done it right there.
maybe that's the
Right there.
story that gets told, is that the rooftops combined with strategic placement has a
Yeah.
opportunity to do this.
That's it.
And not to just say, we can do it only with rooftops, because I
Yeah.
think Ethan, you're right, we're not realistically gonna have every rooftop in the city.
No.
And if we need to go that hard at rooftops, then I think we should be really clear in the language that we need to aggressively go after rooftops in order to.
And the other aspect of this is, I know that a lot of residents who have gone through this process of solar evaluation have concluded that the roofs are not amenable to solar installations, and they have signed up for community solar farms.
But wasn't the
They
third
already,
bullet
so
to
there
your
is, you
point-
can't, so you can't just assume that all the roofs are readily available.
Right.
If they've already signed up, they're not gonna put solar panels.
And
So-
community solar's
Well,
got
presumably
really.
this
got it in
137,000
Yeah.
takes into account orientation and slope. It's not like every roof, right?
Yeah.
Right, but it
No
probably
facing
also
roof's not
doesn't
part of
fully
it, right?
account for, the
Yeah.
fact that we're actively pursuing having large deciduous trees in yards too, so
Yeah.
it probably
Yeah.
shrinks a little, these things.
That's
Tries
the
to
third
factor
point
some
about
of
the
that.
existing, isn't that the third bullet? The program to incentivize existing.
Right, but incentivize, I don't see any scenario where incentivize gets us 2% per year uptake.
Well, can you regulate people to put solar?
I'm
on
not sure, I'm not saying you can, I'm just saying what we have here is kind of incongruous and fantastical.
You should have some kind
Well-
of tax
There's already incentives.
Can I
abatement.
add one more piece of broad context? This doesn't have to be met to meet the climate action goals of,
right.
because we're already carbon free, right?
That's right.
This is the
needs
other,
to be
the
met
citing.
from a enhanced energy plan perspective, from a realistically, the issue of how our energy is produced is a global issue also, and we need to play our role in it, but it's not.
Right.
If you, it's not a
Honestly, though,
need,
Paul, I think the
right?
two are probably linked up more closely than that, because the fact of the matter is, if we electrify everything, we're gonna need the solar to
So,
provide the
yeah.
capacity.
Well, and
that's-
also just the expense, because people who put in heat pumps, and I've talked to more people in the last couple of weeks who said, well, I put in a heat pump, but oh my God, my electric bills went through the roof when I tried to run it over the winter time. And so in all practicality, you put in some solar panels to balance, just to prepay so that you don't freak out when you get your electric bills, because you're not only paying for the electricity, you're paying for a whole bunch of other taxes and services, and
Yeah.
you look at the
Yeah,
whole list
efficiency
of
charges.
things.
Yeah.
But
Whole
Donna, those
list of
people- those
things you're
people that are
paying
freaking
for
out
with
is
your
the-
electric
is the
bill.
increase in electric bill
Even
more
with-
than the natural gas that they saved?
Yeah, but you're paying for the efficiency charges,
So that-
even
it is-
on
it is
this,
factored
even
into
on
the
what
cost
you
effectiveness.
generate, which is like, oh
So,
my God.
so going back to this, going back to this page, I think Ethan asked the
This made
question
my
earlier.
solar less cost effective.
I'm listening.
Ethan asked the question earlier. Was there a specific reason to use the power consumption as the base units to describe the landscape versus capacity
It's from the
for solar panels?
Yeah, so you're talking about megawatt hours?
Yeah,
So yes, that's a artifact of the enhanced energy plan process that we've
Okay.
done.
okay,
And we use megawatt hours because it's technology neutral. And in the ECOS plan, the concept is that you can meet the energy targets
see.
by any technology.
okay.
So that's why everything's in terms of megawatt
I mean,
hours.
technically speaking, it's great because it does incorporate capacity factor,
Yeah.
not just nominal,
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure,
rating.
makes sense to be
It's-
megawatt hours.
The challenge is that, it would be nice for a public document to do a translation of, we think this represents roughly. And I have to say, I have a bias here, I hate the number of panels arguments, because like, what the heck does that mean? Panels
Right.
change so much. But the megawatts, or like how many
Right.
typical
Didn't we
household
call it something
arrays,
like
or like do
150
some
acres
translation.
or
Yeah,
something?
I can deal a lot easier with
So-
megawatts than megawatt
I mean, I
hours,
can
'cause
tell you
kinda
what
have
the
a sense of
area
how many
is.
megawatts a
I don't know off the top of my
system is.
head, but I have the data.
I'm not used to that.
That might be useful. People
Pull
get
it
it.
out.
Yeah, get a
Sense.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, so the Project Sunroof data is, looking at every rooftop in South Burlington, looking at the orientation, looking at the tree cover, and estimating what can be generated on those
So,
But it-
rooftops.
but
So
it
it's,
doesn't figure cost effectiveness though, right?
no,
Yeah.
so,
but so it's making an assumption, I think it's at like 79% of roofs in South Burlington can generate this number, the 137
Yeah.
megawatt hours.
So I think when this landscape gets visible and presented to Green Mountain Power, you will hear a completely different perspective. Because they will think about this from a capacity absorption argument.
They've already said that they don't expect to absorb this without a lot of investment.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we talk about that
Yeah.
a little bit, I mean,
Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
also, this value for rooftop solar potential will evolve, because in figuring out this number, I've been working with the Department of Public Service on this number with a different process, and we were using Project Sunroof as kind of a validating factor. And what we arrived at looking at LiDAR data and working with the Department of Public Service, the number it's very similar. So I expect it maybe to increase a little bit when I edit this to add parking lot capacity.
Are we ready to look at other major areas, or are we done with this, or?
Presumably it's also based upon current technology, solar technologies. Getting better and better.
Yeah, so are there any changes, any fatal flaws that need to be made to renewable energy generation before this gets posted publicly?
I didn't hear anything in the entire plan.
Yeah.
It was a
So-
fatal flaw.
Yeah,
Okay.
No, but I'd love to add, and I know we talked about, the action to require new buildings be oriented to maximize solar.
In the spreadsheet.
We put it here. I think that's an important action.
Well, if we're gonna add new actions, we have a process for doing that.
I know.
but
So
it's-
what are the other actions?
The process is not tonight, though. The process is when we go through for the next major revision, we're gonna look at any actions that have come up since then. So
What are we really doing?
Aren't we doing a revision
That's
now?
all we're doing tonight.
Isn't that what we're doing?
we're
We can wait
trying,
to the next meeting, that's fine. I want.
it's not about the next meeting. It's like in a month or so, right? There's what we agreed to when we voted on the actions was that we were gonna freeze the list of actions and then go through a process of going through the communication so that we were able to give the communication time, because the concern was if we're constantly like factoring in new actions, we're not gonna get the
We've heard
communication
other
done.
ones, but okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I suggest, as the clock is ticking, that all of us, if we have additional edits or comments, we email them to you. I have just edits. I
Sure.
mean, they're nothing, there's some more typos, there's some more things that don't make sense, whatever. So I don't think we need to take time to hear any of those things from me, but I will send them to you.
Okay, that
Is
sounds
there-
great.
So not fatal flaws, but is there anything that folks were surprised at just that didn't exist in this plan that you'd like to see, not for in the next week, but over the next month for Melanie and Ann to work on? Is there an area that you said, oh, I just thought that we were gonna see the plan talk about this? Or do you think that they covered the subject? So I think that would be useful for them to be hearing if they've just.
so there's just one area I just want to clarify for one final time. Government operations does not include South Burlington City School System, right, school district. Government operations does not include. Municipal operations does not include South Burlington City School District. I think that's what you
So,
responded.
yeah, and I'm hesitating because,
the city
no, I
council
think the
doesn't-
only data that I got from Lou was school buses.
Okay,
So that was.
So
one
I
of
think
the
he
things
wasn't able to, and I can check back
Okay.
with him.
so let me ask the question differently. Does any of the buildings that belong to the South Burlington School District come through the commercial part of the natural gas consumption?
Yes,
So it's covered under the commercial.
yeah, I mean, all
Okay.
like essentially non-residential
Okay, good.
accounts are in the commercial, industrial, natural gas data.
Municipal operations are included in commercial
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
So it might be useful to
Yeah.
redefine this not as government operations, but municipal operations or
Municipal.
city
Okay.
operations, something like that.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
yeah.
it can be left as a homework item to say, now time for the school to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you want me to make that one change
Yes.
for you for tomorrow?
I would say I've published it, so unless
Okay.
folks say it's like really, really problematic, I prefer to spend time moving forward rather than republishing stuff.
And I have given other comments on this to the Ann
Yeah.
email I sent. Okay, so-
Not to start a semantic discussion, but government sounds more like what happens in this building, municipal sounds more like the broader public. To me, I mean, the school isn't governing
We will,
anyone.
I would call it a city operations. To me, it's a city operation,
Well,
so.
and that
yeah.
might be a good
Yeah,
distinction.
city operations.
Yeah, you say city
even bigger,
operations,
right?
yes.
Well, and I think you have to be
we
careful
we
too
will,
when
we
you
will work out
mention,
language.
Yeah.
when you mention South Burlington activities, because sometimes I think people tend to think, oh, this is what government of South Burlington is gonna do, whereas for the most part, this report is referring to the citizens, the businesses and everybody and stuff.
yeah.
So you gotta make sure that the language conveys that, you know, that we're not talking just government here. I mean,
Right.
the state of Vermont has kind of gotten itself into that bind with it, with its climate action plan, because, you know, they're on the hook. They're on the hook for this legally, and, you know, it's like they haven't enacted most of the laws necessarily to get you there at this
Right.
point yet.
I mean, that's the enactment piece, I guess, maybe is the one thing that I would call out as not being in here, is that there isn't really a place where it sort of sums up. There's a lot of specific things that need to be done. But there isn't necessarily sort of a clear summation of what's gonna happen next, right? Like you get done with this plan and you're like, oh, things are happening, and then. But it's kind of passive voice, like classic, research document. And there's potentially, I think, a sort of summary piece at the end that's like, and go, right? You need to get
Yeah.
involved, like this is something you want to be part of. The city is gonna start doing things and it's gonna involve like laws changing and policies changing and like, I know we don't know all the details of that, but I think it's really important that this not just feel like it magically happens.
Yeah, that's why I think that information, like where it says just policy under, you know, that's where the blue charts can be probably less information than it is useful.
You have to.
I read
call-
something on another page that maybe, probably requires some discussion, the natural areas page. There's a sentence that says, talks about equity, it says, this includes ensuring that housing in environmentally desirable areas is equitable. And then says needs equity consideration next to, basically, on the natural areas page, saying that we need to protect our remaining natural resources. I don't
Where are you?
understand those two things. I don't think they're correct.
Are you in natural areas?
Yeah,
Okay.
And you're on the second page, natural areas.
I'm on,
So in the table,
well, in the table, but in the text, says this includes ensuring that housing in environmentally desirable areas is equitable. I'm sure I know what that means. And then we have next to revise LDRs to protect remaining natural resources, says needs equity consideration. I don't know where those two things came from.
Melanie, is that sort of a statement about fair housing? And the sort of the challenging effect of limiting housing in some areas is that housing can then become exclusive because there's lesser quantity of it. So how do you make sure that we are meeting our federal requirements for fair housing, that we're not sort of creating parts of the city that are unintentionally only a certain income bracket? Is that what that's about?
yes.
And it's a challenging subject,
It's a very challenging subject,
very, very challenging subject.
because certainly the SEQ has that reputation.
There's no housing SQ that is or is going to be affordable as defined. It's just never gonna be. And
That's
raise the
not, I
possi-
don't think that's true. I don't think
It's-
that's true, because every house with a certain size lot can have an ADU, which would be affordable.
the.
Every single one, almost every single single family house in the southeast quadrant probably has adequate space to do an ADU, or they could
So,
just divide up the
That's fine,
existing
and I know
house.
that's one of our recommendation
Yeah.
to allow for that.
So
But
that's
that's very
affordable.
different than saying that we can't protect our natural resources because it needs equity consideration. That's a very different
Yeah, it's
thing.
very different.
That's what I'm focused on here.
I don't think it says we can't protect our natural
It
resources.
says needs equity consideration next to protect remaining natural resources.
Well, I mean, assuming that if you do have some construction in the southeast quadrant, there can be affordable units mixed in affordably. I don't, I think you're talking density. You're talking density, when you incorporate smaller units in more dense developments, you can get it in there. I think you're
Unless we're
just,
protecting lawns.
yeah, you're just not doing
I
single
don't
family
disagree
homes
with
anymore,
that,
that's all.
But what it says next
No
to
big ones
protect
anyway.
remaining natural resources is needs equity consideration. And I don't think those two things go together.
So are you saying that in order to preserve natural resources, we need to acknowledge that we're going to be persisting inequity or increasing inequity in the city, and that's a trade-off that we're asking
No, I
to?
think that protecting natural resources benefits low income, middle income, high income.
Well, not if they don't have any access to it.
Well, let's
I
provide
mean,
access.
that's the whole
provide
key,
access.
that's the whole
I think-
key.
I think
Have
providing
access
access
to-
is what
to-
that means.
It's
Do you
about
think that's what that
access.
means?
It's about access, yeah.
Oh, okay, well, let's say that then. I mean, so it's not about not protecting, but it's about protecting and providing access.
And
That's fine.
part
Okay.
of my view about equity of the natural areas is that everybody has access to clean water, clean air, and space for recreation, which we have in the city's parks. We've got big parks, 110 acres here, with another 60 at Underwood, and then several others. So that's also equity, and positive equity from the preservation of open space.
So can we change that to
Some
say,
people don't have cars to drive there.
prioritize?
Only
access?
750 out of 9,000 don't have cars.
Unfortunately, there aren't people here in the room who represent the other side.
Right.
So, I mean, we can speak for ourselves. I live in Southeast Quadrant, but I've also heard feedback from other community residents who think otherwise, so.
Oh,
We
yes.
can say all we want, but there's a
I
different
don't live
view.
in the southeast quadrant,
Yeah.
but I certainly have access to
Yeah,
what's there.
yeah. So,
I think that this, let's have Melanie and Ann think about how they can refine this. I think that this is, a good case study of how equity is a really, really hard subject. And, in my view, this same hard conversation applies to every single part of this plan, because the work of equity is to challenge ourselves against all the things that we want to do and what are the challenges of doing that in an equitable way. I
Sure.
don't think that there's nobody that would disagree with the idea of let's protect our natural resources. What are the side effects of it and how do we mitigate them?
And I think this is
And
also the
same
risk
thing
of,
on everything else.
also the risk of leaving it as fairly vague, because it makes it easy for some people to read it and say, oh, well, I can keep doing the thing I want, and then somehow it'll become equitable, and other people will read it and say, oh, we're gonna do something totally different because it's definitely now gonna take into consideration my concerns. So everyone can see what they want, but it doesn't necessarily mean we've actually grappled with the conflict that exists in there. So I think if we were able to get to where we had a much more specific comment, right? If it said something like, we're gonna create some mechanism to allow explicitly affordable housing to get interspersed and built on existing lots in SEQ, well, that would be a very concrete conversation we could have, right?
It's already part of the regs, again, but I'm focused.
Right,
here
but
on-
and I think, and I'm recognizing my own bias here, but we're talking about the SAQ and we're talking about natural areas as an unbuilt area. It could be somewhere else and the resource is a stream that's nearby that is eroding or polluted or whatever the issue might be. It may be an air quality and sensitivity, and that's the challenge of we're not everybody's experience.
yeah.
On page 18, I had, it's land use, something that I've raised before, but I'd like to add something that partner with the South Burlington School Board to increase school bus ridership.
Is it a change in an action?
It's an addition to and it's an additional action, yes.
Well, we had that in the big action list, right? So it would at least be in the appendix.
I wanted in the small action, but,
Okay, Michael.
well, we had a meeting with the school board and, you know,
And what happened?
Are
they're,
we-
they're
Is
gung
this
ho
in
to help.
government
Right.
operations?
It's not even,
It's to reduce vehicle miles traveled, so it's
In
transportation,
transportation.
on page 18. on mine anyway.
Apologize for everybody at home seeing me scrolling back and forth here.
Page 21 in the latest in the packet.
Next table.
Okay.
In there, added in there. I mean, we've got partner with GMP and we've got
How
partner
do we
with.
know which ones are high and which ones aren't high? It's just like
Well, these are all high.
no, I know, but how was that determination made and how do we know that the one
I think.
Michael's suggesting is high? It's just like kind of, you know, belly button kind of.
So in the building, sorry,
It's a swag.
so in the buildings, thermal transportation land use, the high ones were the ones that gave us the most reduction in the clear path modeling.
Is that
Do we
true
have
for
to
the
model,
ones?
for instance, the things on this page, invest in Green Mountain Transit to increase? I mean, I thought we weren't able to do it at that level.
So,
Partner to increase
yeah, I mean,
membership.
so it's developing a measure that like models that. So the modeling that accompanies that action is reducing vehicle miles traveled. So that's like, we can model the outcome of what that
Right, no,
partnership
but I'm
with
saying, how do we know
GMT
that
brings us.
each of these actions is high impact in terms of reducing VMT? I mean, that's, and presumably that's just like guessing, which I'm not using that pejoratively.
Yeah,
but-
no, I mean, it's a,
Estimating
Right, the result that is hoped for from this is a high impact action. These are the community's identified hopeful ways of achieving that.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, and I think that's, at this level, it's hard to really get much further than
So
that.
to be fair, we as a group did not go through the process of identifying each of the actions and said, this is high, this is medium, this is low. That responsibility was delegated to Melanie and Ann. So we just have to stay with the process. Let's stay with the
Yeah, I
process
mean,
and move on.
a few meetings back, we had a conversation and we provided you a memo with our thinking behind what's a high impact action and
Right.
what's a
Yeah.
supporting action, and it seems like we got some, general agreement on
Yeah.
that, and so this is the outcome.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because it does show up somewhere in here, but I thought under the reduced transportation that the trash pickup, the every other week trash pickup would have had more of an impact. It does show up in there somewhere, but it doesn't show up in the place I expected it to.
So that one would be under
It
probably,
didn't really show up under municipal, so, because it's not a municipal service, so it was a little confusing as to where it ended up. Because I can't find it right now, because I can't figure out where to look.
I'm wondering if, given that we're past 9:30, I know that we do want to dig into some of these questions as part of this review process. But should we make a plan to send edits in?
Yeah, that,
Send questions in?
I'll go through it again and
Yeah.
send, but there's no page numbers, so I was just wondering if I should just like make a PDF and.
How about this?
What's the easiest way to
Melanie
do
or
it?
I will make a PDF that has page numbers for the whole thing. Send it out to you tomorrow, and then for a first round of questions or comments, I don't think we've established a deadline already,
Yeah.
but like,
Give us a deadline.
would a week from Sunday be enough time to have a first round? I think some folks have already done it.
Editable format?
I've already
It's like
done it,
Word or
but-
PowerPoint, what's
is a
the-
combination of Microsoft Word and Publisher.
Keynote is just hard to mark up, right?
You should be able to comment with little call out boxes in PDF.
Oh.
Yeah,
if
Even
you have that facility.
Acrobat, even the
The
reader
free-
does
free
that.
Free
Acrobat.
version?
I use that a lot. Text boxes.
Yeah,
Michael will be your tech support.
There's a comment function there, but the
Or
idea
feel
of,
free, if you want to print a copy of one, I know it's not, it's old school, but if you want to handwrite them and give them back to us, that's fine too.
yeah, if we have a copy with page numbers, then that also makes it easier.
Yeah, just do that. And we'll
That's
do
what
our
so
job.
a
And
week
it's due a
from,
week from Sunday.
a week from Sunday, is that fair? So that gives 2 weekends,
Okay.
for preliminary comments. This is, or sure,
And when is the next time we meet?
Or I could just hand you.
August
I could
24th.
Hand you my
no,
notes.
no, you've got August.
Earlier than that, I thought.
Well, so I have not sent you out the email about the public comment meeting that you want to have before August 10th, so I have to get that out tomorrow to you. That would be your next meeting.
Public comment meeting
So if we
before
met on August 24th,
Right,
it
so
would
you
be.
wanted to have a meeting where the public could just share their
Right.
feedback.
Okay, that's news to me. I was
Maybe I
not-
talked with Ann about it. So you don't have to be there. This is a public
Okay.
comment, formal sort of marker in time. You decide you want to do
Okay.
that. So that people could say, here's my feedback on it.
Any specific date for that?
I have to send it out tomorrow. I'm sorry, I'm just behind.
Okay.
So that would be after we've given our comments and you've done another revision, and that would be
Be on this,
posted.
it's on this draft.
Or they're gonna make comments on this draft, so this could be,
Well, because that's the whole point of, we have to have a
That's right.
draft out there for the public to spend some time with, and if we keep revising
if we
it,
keep
then
revising.
then it drives the public crazy to
We'll
say,
never
what am I
all be
giving
looking at the
comments on?
same thing.
So there'll be another opportunity later for folks, but we need to, like, this month, starting
Yeah.
today through the next month, there has to be something that they can respond to and not be having to refresh their browser of did it change again.
So let me know when that meeting is
Will do.
going to happen.
Mr. Chairman,
Before we close, should we see if there's any comments from the public? I know Roseanne's been hanging on the whole meeting.
Roseanne is our public.
Roseanne, any
She's
comments?
still there?
Am I the only public?
Oh, my.
you're the only one
You're
who
the
stuck it out.
You're the survivor.
It's late, so I'm just gonna make two brief comments, and it had to do with the natural resource lands. And part of the thing that I keep thinking is you're gonna kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So if you allow more buildings to be put on natural resource land so that there'll be more affordable units, you have destroyed the very land that you wanted them to be able to enjoy. If the issue is being able to enjoy, then have public access or public transportation to get there. But as you also, a few said, these lands provide benefits for everyone, and perhaps more so for people of color who are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. And the other thing was sort of bizarre. You were talking, I think it was Donna, said something about, well, ADU, accessory dwelling units are allowed. So are you saying that in a development in the southeast quadrant that the starting prices are about what, 600,000, 700,000-ish, the homeowner is going to be allowed to build another unit behind their house, and they will sell that as an ADU or rent it out as an ADU?
So,
you don't have to answer this, but it sounds
Right, so I can answer
bizarre.
it quickly, Roseanne. Under Vermont law, every single family home in the state of Vermont is allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit,
Right?
either within
Okay.
the house or if there's space on the property,
Right? Okay.
But
So,
it can be part of the existing
Yeah, it
house.
can be within the house. It could
Yeah.
be the
so
basement of
someone
the
who
house.
buys a
Many of them out there.
$700,000 house is going to either build onto it or part of their house and sell that as an affordable.
Not
It's
sold,
not- you don't
rental.
sell it.
Sell it as
You don't
affordable.
sell it.
It's just they could put an ADU if they wanted to.
I know, but you're talking about affordable housing. That was
It's
a solution. It sounded,
Often done for a family member,
Yeah.
Yeah, I know,
aging in
but-
they used to call them in-law apartments.
I know exactly what you're talking about, but you're
But there's
phrasing
many
it
of them out
as.
there. You'd be surprised at how many there are.
No,
in
I know there are. Do you know of
Rutland
any in
and
the
a number of
southeast
places.
quadrant, in the South Village or Cider Mill, or the issues going up on Spear Meadows or the O'Brien? Are people gonna
As a mental model,
As a
Roseanne,
custom.
I might think about some of the stories that have come out of California where housing prices have gotten really high. And it's less about the people who bought last year and were able to afford the prices that they are now, but people who might have been living there for 20 years and are now on a fixed income and are now looking at property taxes that are 6 times what they used to pay.
I
And those
understand.
folks might be a
Yeah.
lot more excited about.
I
the
understand
idea.
that, but
So-
you're talking about new, well, okay, I just can't envision an $800,000 house or a $1 million house, as we see on in the southeast quadrant here, that they would then think we'll do an ADU because we,
It's being
for
done. in
affordable
urban-
housing. Yeah,
It's being
right.
done in urban centers, bigger urban
Yeah, urban
centers,
centers,
certainly.
yeah.
Well, wait,
Yeah.
and just to be
But it's-
clear,
but
it
it's
has the
common.
potential to be affordable, but it's not necessarily affordable housing.
That's
It's-
right.
It's
Right.
A
housing
lot of them are not.
in a small percentage of a dwelling unit. May or may not be affordable. The hope is that it is affordable and helping a broader housing need, but
Oh.
not.
It's more the intent. People often are doing this so that their parents or their children or, some relative has a place to live affordably. So it is affordable housing.
Okay,
Well-
all right, okay, I'll stop it, sort of,
Yeah,
okay,
no,
thank you.
appreciate the perspective though, Roseanne.
Right,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Roseanne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roseanne, for staying with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Ethan, I will not be able to attend the next meeting. I will be out of the country from the 14th of August until the 15th of 16th of September.
I want
And
your
the time
travel